Ladies and gentlemen, what a treat we have in store here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show here on Sportanarium. And I could not think of a better way than to kick off this week's show and also to continue to celebrate our 2-year anniversary in somebody who's one of the most intriguing people we've ever had on the show. And here's somebody that was an extremely successful fighter, winning the International Masters Championship, had a 12-1 record, a dominant fighter. Got the pleasure and privilege to watch a number of his fights here over the past few weeks, and he's transitioned very successfully now into a star wrestler on behalf of Grand Pro Wrestling and In-N-Out Wrestling, and he's also the owner of the Davis Boxing Gym, which is helping a who's who of athletes train and get the proper conditioning that they need in the sport of their choice. And without further ado, here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show, the pride of Blackpool, and that's RPD, RP Davies, superstar for Grand Pro Wrestling and former International Masters champion of the sport of boxing. My friend, how are you?
I'm good. That was the best introduction I've ever had by far of anything.
Well, hopefully Grand Pro Wrestling is paying attention. If they want to have that as an intro each time you come into the ring, I'd be more than happy to lend the audio to you, my friend. So anytime you want to come out to the ring.
That's getting given to the sound guy next time. Next time I enter, that's what I'm coming out to.
Well, we'll definitely do something special for you if you choose to. So we definitely love you, and obviously it's a tremendous honor to speak with you. And congratulations on all the success, obviously, and being a successful boxer and transitioning now into a successful wrestler. And I know it's been a while since you last were in the ring, obviously, unfortunately, due to the pandemic and everything else that's going on across the world. But I was curious for our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium listening, whether it's here in the States or also in the UK or across the world, and how much have you thought about the last time you were in the ring against Lucas Steele?
Yeah, quite a lot. Obviously, the pandemic itself has stopped a lot of things for a lot of people, and obviously it's stopped a lot of more important things than wrestling, and obviously that's in my mind as well. But I do believe that what we do, our passions in life and the things we do make us who we are. And so, yeah, wrestling's become a very big part of my life, and I've missed it since it's gone. And I look forward to the day that obviously we get over this pandemic and we can get back to some sort of normality. But by that, I can get back into the wrestling ring and entertain the fans again.
Absolutely. No question about it. We definitely want you back in the ring. And it's been so long that we almost forgot what it was like to have a crowd. It was almost what it was like to see you in the ring and everybody else in Grand Pro Wrestling. In a lot of ways, RP, I felt that the match against Steele, after watching it, and when you started against Mickey Barnes to where you were at that moment, I really feel like that was kind of the most signature win you've had, maybe even as important of a win as you had when you won the International Masters title. I mean, that match I kind of felt was what you finally had built up to be in that last man standing match, and just how you carried yourself in the ring, and just from where you were from when you started to that moment. Was that as big a hallmark win as you had compared to boxing?
Yeah, I mean, my boxing career and my wrestling career are two very different things. But I'm proud equally of both of them. I'm as proud of the wrestling as I am of the boxing. But yeah, I agree with you. The last match I had against Lucas, I felt it was my best performance to date. I felt that it was me coming together more as a rounded athlete and understanding the industry a little bit better. And yeah, I thought it was the start of a role for me there. And then obviously the pandemic hit. But yeah, I enjoyed that match. It was a great match and the crowd loved it. And that's what matters to me. More than anything, it's making sure that the fans go home happy. And yeah, I look forward to getting back and hopefully improving on it.
How different of a role does the crowd play in wrestling versus boxing?
There is obvious differences. It's very, very crowd related, is wrestling. The whole show is based around the crowd and making sure they're entertained and we're getting the right responses from them. That the bad guys make him boo and the good guys make him cheer. And, we're trying we're trying our very best to make sure that the show goes as well for them as possibly can, But of course, boxing is associated to the crowd, but in a different way. When I was boxing, I must say I very rarely thought of the crowd because, I've got a guy in there swinging, trying to take my head off. So I had to concentrate on him. But yeah, I would be lying if I said that you don't feel that energy from the crowd that you get. And when they're cheering or whatever behind you, they can lift you a little bit. They can lift your spirits minutes and make you fight a little bit harder. And so, yeah, I mean, both disciplines definitely have a massive crowd connection, but I would say wrestling is probably a little bit more so, purely because, you know, that is the name of the game, is to keep them involved and keep them interested in what's going on in that ring.
Absolutely, no question about it. And I kind of think with boxing, after you get into the ring, you don't think about the crowd. You think about the guy you're fighting against, and you think about everybody else in the ring and maybe the 3 minutes in the round. But in a wrestling match, you almost need that crowd to kind of pick you up a little bit, whether you're down in the match or you're looking to perform a certain move to kind of get that energy from the crowd. And I was also curious for a worldwide audience here in Sportanarium, and being in a match that, let's say, 15 minutes long or even 20 minutes long, versus being in a boxing match where you have 3-minute rounds and then you go into your corner and you get a minute breather where you put water on your face or they clean you up, or if you have a cut or you have different strategy that your trainer goes through with you. But being in that wrestling match, there is none of that. You have to go out and execute that match to the best of your ability, and to execute that match to help your other opponent as well, because you also have his life and you have his situation in your hands. So I was curious on, what do you see the differences are in terms of being in a wrestling match versus a boxing match?
Well, I think both of them are very free flowing. In a boxing match, you have a game plan when you go in, and you've kind of drawn up battle plans with your team of where you want to go and the sort of tactics you're going to use. And then obviously you also have usually a plan B and a plan C if them tactics don't work. So you've got options in there. Whereas wrestling is very, very, very difficult. But when you go out there, like you say, you haven't got that minute break that you're going to get where you can sit down and talk to your trainer. You can't sit down and talk to the promoter or whatnot in between the match. Once you're out there, you're out there. So a lot of it's on the cuff, and you've got to react. And you've got to react to how the crowd goes. Because just because you have a plan when you go into a wrestling match doesn't mean that's necessarily how the match is going to go, because the crowd might not react exactly the way you want them to, and you can't force them to react in a certain way. So you sometimes have to kind of, flow and adapt the way that that's going, and kind of be spontaneous in that way. So yeah, I mean, they're very, very different. It's hard to say, but wrestling, make no mistake, very, very difficult sport, and it's certainly one of the hardest things that I've ever tried to accomplish.
Absolutely, it is very difficult to accomplish, but you are doing a phenomenal job, my friend, out there in the ring, and the agility that you have in such a short amount of time that you've been in the ring.
Thank you. Thank you, mate. I appreciate that. It's very nice.
Absolutely. Listen, I've gotten to watch your matches, and I've seen how far you've come, and there's no question that you have a great future ahead of you when it comes to the wrestling business. And speaking of that, obviously, Grand Pro Wrestling, you've done a lot with the promotion, and John Brannigan, who's done a lot, I know, with the company and getting you involved in the ring. I mean, how influential has John Brannigan been for your career now at Grand Pro Wrestling?
Massive. Johnny's a great friend, but he is the reason I'm doing this, because, I didn't actively go out there to become a pro wrestler. After I retired from boxing, I had become a kind of a stay-at-home dad, really. I had my gym and I ran that, but, I had no real ambitions anymore after the boxing. And that's quite sad when I look back now, because, I'd lost a massive part of myself. And, that kind of competitive spirit that I believe I have had kind of left me a little bit. And Johnny approached me out of the blue, known me a long time, knew of obviously what I'd done boxing-wise. And he owned a wrestling company, and he asked whether it would be something I'd be interested in doing. And he knew that I'd always been a fan of wrestling, because when I was boxing, I always used to come to the ring to a different wrestler's theme tune. That was like my little nod to it. And I've been a fan of wrestlers as a little kid. Literally since being a little kid, I've watched it right through. But my dad and my granddad was also from kind of a boxing background. My granddad boxed, my dad boxed, and that was the route I went down. Especially in Britain, there wasn't many avenues to become a professional wrestler where I was, and the ability to jump into boxing was a lot easier, because there were a lot of boxing gyms around, and especially even from my town, we have a bit of a history of boxers. And so, yeah, that was the route I went, and I don't regret it, because I absolutely love the fight game. I love boxing, and I always have. But in equal share, I also love wrestling, and it's just a weird coincidence, really, how my life turned out. That luckily, I have been lucky to be able to do both.
And you're doing great at both, and you've definitely shown that you can transition pretty nicely here. And I was also curious about that, because a lot of athletes try wrestling, and it doesn't always work out. One of the biggest examples of that was was a guy, Steve Mongo McMichael, who was in WCW in the mid to late 1990s. And he was a Super Bowl champion with the Chicago Bears. Yeah, he was a great football player, but when you watched him in the ring, he just didn't have it. He just didn't able to relate to the fans. He didn't transition, and it was just not the best of experiences. And we see this a lot. I mean, even Rob Gronkowski was with the WWE, and you thought maybe he could be a wrestler, but he wound up going back to football. And not every athlete can do that and be able to go in from whether it's boxing like you, whether it's basketball or football or any other sport that's physical, and then to go into wrestling, because there's a lot that involves wrestling that it's a lot harder than people think. I mean, talk about that transition that you made from boxing to wrestling, because I think it's a lot more difficult than people lead on.
Oh, 100%, Tom, 100%. And I think that's why some athletes from various other sports have struggled, because I think they take it lightly. I think they think that you hear that famous word, fake, and, it's not this and it's not that. And they jump over thinking that it's going to be a joke compared to a professional sport. And it really, really isn't. As tough as anything I've ever done. And the athletes that I've got to train alongside and perform alongside, both men and women, have been absolutely phenomenal. As good athletes I've ever met. And like I say, I've been in the boxing game for 10 years. And some of these guys and girls, the things they can do, just frightening, mind-blowing. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a really, really hard transition. When Johnny first came to me and he said, Ryan, would you fancy it? I loved the idea of it. And I thought, I didn't really know the gravity of the question, to be honest. I thought I'd just jump into it and I'd have a bit of fun out there and that'd be it. But there's so much that goes into it, from a performance standpoint, from an athletic standpoint, and the whole thing. And without doubt, one of the toughest challenges I have ever participated in and tried to get my body ready for, but at the same time, one of the most worthwhile, because I've absolutely loved it.
And we can see why that you definitely love it. And we can definitely see why that you're passing with flying colors when it comes to the transition between boxing to wrestling. And that's why we're honored to have on the Sports Report the #1 global sports show that was the International Masters champion, and he's now a superstar for Grand Pro Wrestling, and that's RPD, RPD, RPD. RP Davies here, as I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice. And for more information on the Sports Report, you can go to sportsreportx.com and listen to all of our archives. You can go to soundcloud.com/the Sports Report 2019. Also, you can catch us on YouTube now, the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show. And as always, a huge shout out to the entire team at Sportanarium, and that includes Lakey, Arv, Danny, Dale, Sean, Steve, everybody at Sportanarium that has made us the #1 global sports show. And you can check us out now on the Sportanarium YouTube page, which you can follow on YouTube at Sportanarium, along with Instagram and Twitter. And you can also like Sportanarium on Facebook at Sportanarium Media. And you can always catch the Sports Report Fridays, 5 to 7 Eastern Time, 10 to 12 UK time. Saturdays, we're back on 5 to 7 Eastern Time, 10 to 12 UK time. And the News Report comes back Sundays, 5 to 7 Eastern Time, 10 to 12 UK time. And you can do that at www.sportanarium.com. And we're honored to have here on the Sports Report the #1 global sports show, the owner of the Davis Boxing Gym and the International Masters champion when he was a boxer. He was 12-1 in the ring, and now he's as good, if not better, as a wrestler for Grand Pro Wrestling, a number of other different outlets here in the UK. And that is RPD, Ryan RP Davies. And we are talking all things related to his great career in the boxing circle and in the wrestling ring. And Ryan, I know that you've done a lot when it comes to being a boxer and a fighter, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention him, because I know he trained you and he meant a lot to you for your career as a whole. But talk about what your father meant to your career.
Again, there would be no boxing career without my old man. It sounds sad to say, but he genuinely is my best friend in life. I looked to him as my hero growing up, and he boxed, and that's probably the reason I decided to get into it, because, I thought so much of him, and I kind of wanted to prove myself to him as well, And so I got into boxing, and when I showed interest in it, my father then got behind me, and, I don't think he ever wanted me to be a boxer. I think he understood how tough that sport is and how cruel that sport can be sometimes. But when he saw how much effort that I'd put into it, he basically got behind me and became my full-time trainer for it.
And he definitely did a great job in training you, because, listen, you were 12-1 professionally, and you won a lot of big fights, and you were involved in some great moments in the ring. And I was also curious for our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium, in terms of what was that like winning your first title on April the 22nd, 2016? team. What did that mean to you winning the title?
Amazing. Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, I'm under no illusions. There were much bigger titles to win, and we planned on doing so. But it was certainly a title up the ladder, and it showed my intentions of where I wanted to go and whatnot. But just to have won a title within professional boxing meant so much, because there'd been a lot of kind of setbacks, and it'd been a tough road to get there, and it kind of justified it all to me. It justified and it made it all worthwhile that together, me and my dad had achieved a professional title within the sport we love together. I can't speak highly enough of it. It was just a great night, and we were hoping for many more. It just didn't work out that way. But that was something that will always be with me for now, for the rest of my life. And then I can share with my dad, because, we did it together.
Is it different, you think, winning a title in boxing versus, let's say, eventually when you win the world title in Grand Pro Wrestling or anywhere else you wrestle? I mean, is that a different feeling, you think, being a champion in boxing where you hold, let's say, the International Masters title that you held versus, let's say, a title you might hold in wrestling? I mean, is there a different feel, you think?
Well, I haven't won a title in the wrestling yet, but I'm sure it will mean just as much to me when I do, because, again, it's kind of a rite of passage, really, that, that your work has been acknowledged, and that the stuff that you're doing has been worthwhile, and that you have been appreciated for what you're doing. So, that is definitely a massive ambition for me, to win a belt within professional wrestling. But yeah, to win a professional boxing title meant the world to me, because boxing is such an individual sport. You're in there on your own. And I think a lot of people think that winning something like that means only something to you, but it doesn't, because although it is only you in there, it's a team that takes you there. And together, me and my dad were a team, and all the work we put in behind the scenes for years, and all the work we'd put in the gyms, all over the country. We travelled all over the country to spar, the best lads we could to prepare for them moments. It's really like a team effort, and it still does. I don't consider the fact that I won that belt. I always consider that we won that belt.
Absolutely, you both won the title, and as always, a huge shout out to your dad, and cannot thank him enough for what he's done for the sport of boxing, and most importantly, what he's done for you. But I want to say something that you probably don't get asked a lot about, but I was curious on how much you thought about it or reflected on it, and that was the fight against William Warburton. That was the only time you lost in your career, but in a lot of ways, I actually think you won because of that fight, because that was a moment where a fighter loses unexpectedly, and then it goes back and it takes them a step back almost, and it's hard to understand or grip that they lost in a fight. But yet, if you look at that fight that you had against Warburton, you were able to bounce back and have a lot of success in the ring, to where it's led you today as a superstar wrestler on behalf of Grand Pro Wrestling. I mean, have you ever thought about the Warburton match that way, and how often have you reflected on that fight?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, the William Warburton fight was the most important fight of my career, because I learned so much from that fight. I took that fight on very early in my career. He was very, very experienced, but at the time I was expected to win, and that's something that I have a bit of pride in. He is, to this day, still known as one of the best journeyman fighters that our country, Great Britain, has ever seen, and I believe he was. He was a very, very tough, cagey opponent, but I honestly believed that night that I would beat him. I prepared to beat him, and we fought him, and it wasn't my night. It just wasn't my night that night, and I'll make no excuses. I was beaten fair and square, and that's the way it was. Now, the lessons I learned away from that was obviously one about weight. I'd 100% gone down too low to fight him. Well, I didn't feel strong in there when I actually got in. It was the lightest I'd ever boxed. I think I got to it was welterweight. I got to welterweight there, which what I ended up fighting up at middleweight and things like that. So got a lot of weight difference there, and also the way I boxed. Maybe I was a little bit too, for that fight, a little bit too gung ho. I was too eager to please the fans, and I made it as exciting as I could early, and that maybe wasn't the smartest move. So I learned a lot that way. But more importantly than anything, and this is why this fight means so much to me to this day, it taught me a lot about life, because when you're winning in anything, people get a lot of people behind you, and that's great. But when you're losing, you kind of find out who's actually behind you, and that was the lesson I learned in that fight, because all the people who I thought was with me, some took a little bit of a step to the side, and I remember that, and I'll always remember that. And I also remember those who never faltered and was with me the whole way, and probably more behind me after the loss than they ever were before it. And so, yeah, it taught me a little bit of humility, and it taught me to respect my opponents more and to train more diligently and train smarter. And that's the other thing, train smarter, and come at the right weight and hydrate properly and have a lot of things that I'd not really thought about up until that point. So, yeah, in a lot of ways, the William Warburton fight, not only from a boxing perspective, but just generally a life perspective, was one of the best lessons that I have ever had, and I truly wouldn't take it back now if I could. If I could change that result, I wouldn't, because I think it redirected my life, certainly to the way it's gone and the way it's going.
Absolutely, no question about it. In a lot of ways, I thought your boxing career kind of climaxed the fight with Michael Biles, because that fight to me was who you were as a boxer, where you had great jabs, you had a great uppercut, you were very good in the ring defensively, you cornered him throughout the fight, and that was who you were as a boxer. And even though the scores only had it 58-57, I don't think it was as close as the fight was scored to be. But in a lot of ways, the Biles fight to me was the fight that really was the signature of who RP Davies is as a fighter. Talk to me about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, what you've just said is more or less a mimic of what my dad says about that fight. Yeah, he still says that was my best performance as a professional fighter, and I probably agree with him. Our back was up against the wall against Biles that night, and we knew it was going to be tough. He'd come in with a winning record, and he fully intended to do a bit of a number on me. I was giving away quite a lot of weight that night because it was a last-minute change of opponent, and he was a much bigger guy than me. But, I was a diligent trainer. I always have been, and I'd prepared very, very well for that night. And so when I got in there, I really just it was weird. The pressure was, although it was maybe the hardest fight of my career, it was the one with the least pressure, because I was always better, and I am always better when my back's up against the wall. And my back was up against the wall that night, and it brought the best out in me. And like I say, the scorecards was close. To be honest, I just think it was because I believed that was because it was such a good fight, so exciting to watch and so give and take. I think they maybe give Mike rounds that maybe he didn't always deserve, because if you're going off scoring punches, I was landing more and blocking a lot more as well. But again, I don't really think about that, because the only thing that mattered was I won. And to be fair, Michael deserved a bit of credit that night, because it does take two to tango. And God, he certainly tangoed with me that night. I felt that fight for a few months afterwards. So yeah, it was a good fight, and probably my favourite of my career. That.
Absolutely. And again, that was who you were as a fighter. That was where we knew you were going to build into somebody that was going to challenge for titles, who was going to move up in the rankings, because you were showing yourself as that's the kind of signature RP Davies fight was going to be, where you were going to be very good defensively. You were going to have a good jab. You were going to have a good uppercut. You weren't going to get yourself into too many positions where you had to be defensive. I mean, that was kind of the hallmark of who you were as a fighter. And then how often have you thought about the Kevin McCauley fight? Because that was your last fight in June of 2017. And looking back, I mean,
yeah.
Have you thought about that fight as well often?
Not as much as the Michael Biles fight, because again, that was kind of, I just signed with a new promoter, and that was the start of the battle plan, really, of where we wanted to go. We had a few fights lined up. That was the first. And then we had a title fight right after that lined up. And then had I won that fight, we had another title fight lined up immediately after that. So there was a genuine plan of how to get me to where we wanted to go in my career. And McCauley was just the first stop on that plan. So again, I couldn't make a mistake and take him lightly, because if I slip up against him, all the other opportunities go away. So I knew I had to be on my game. And Kevin is such a tough, experienced guy again. I would never be disrespectful enough not to give him the respect he deserves and go in there. So like I said, I got in there, I boxed well that night. And to be honest, my head was always just on performing, getting out of there, staying as safe as I can, and moving on to the next fight, and try not to pick up as much damage as I could, so that we could get straight back into training literally a couple of days later, which we did. And that was great. And then obviously from there, the next fight never happened due to the retirement and came.
I'm going to say something that you're probably not expecting, but October 3rd, 2017 is when you announced your retirement. And obviously, talking with you, we knew that there were big things ahead, big fights ahead. You were going to win more titles. And who knows, maybe you would have had a career that would have took you globally. Maybe it would have took you to winning a world title, or certainly more titles in the UK. But in a lot of ways, I actually think the retirement was a blessing in disguise. And the reason that it was is because it's given you something something now in becoming a wrestler that you always wanted to do. You've always been a wrestling fan since you've been at a very young age. You've loved the sport, and in a lot of ways, if you were a fighter, and who knows, maybe you would have had this success, maybe you wouldn't have had this success. We'll never know. It's one of those unknowns, and it could have went either way, and it's all a what if. But in a lot of ways, I actually think, RP, that the retirement on October 3rd, 2017, when you announced it, is actually a blessing in disguise. I mean, talk to me about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, like I say, I put so many years and so much hard work into boxing, and I'll never regret it because it was great. Literally some of the greatest times of my life, and I got to spend it with my dad, and their memories are with me forever. And when I retired from boxing, like you say, I could have maybe gone on to do bigger things, and maybe I wouldn't because, I'm not arrogant enough to believe anything is written. You get what you earn, and I believe I could have gone on to do other things, but again, we'd have only known that with time, and it really is a what if now, and I've come to terms with that. But when it first happened, as you can appreciate, I was very, very bitter about it because I'd put so much time into that sport, and it was a genuine passion of mine. And when it all got the rug got pulled underneath me, and the opportunity to fight again kind of slipped me by, I couldn't understand why. I'm not a particular, I wouldn't say I'm unreligious, but I'm not committed to any sort of faith, and I just didn't understand what the purpose of it was. I didn't realize what my plan was. I think that's what I believe in. I believe in kind of destiny. I believe in destiny, and I believe things happen how they're meant to happen. And when my career come to an end, I couldn't understand why I put all that much time in. What was the purpose of it? And I felt like that for quite a few months after it. And like you say, this is where I start to agree with you. Now with time and reflection, I can understand that maybe I was never meant to. That's why I got taken away from it. I wasn't meant to because maybe my destiny lay elsewhere, And so although it was a great career and I loved it and I had the best time in my life, I am also really, really, really loving what I'm doing now. And that opportunity would never have come along had I not had to retire from boxing. And so, like you say, I'm just grateful. I'm grateful for the journey, and I'm grateful for the ride, and I'm just looking forward to kind of seeing where it goes.
And we are definitely looking forward to seeing where it goes. And it leads you then to Only the Strong Survive, Grand Pro Wrestling, your first match against the bad lad, Mickey Barnes. And he is definitely a bad lad. But I got to ask you, he is definitely a bad lad. He is a big man. Anybody who hasn't got a chance to watch Grand Pro Wrestling on YouTube or anywhere else, go and do yourself a favor and watch the match between RP Davies and the bad lad Mickey Barnes, and any other matches with the bad lads have, because they are bad men. They are definitely bad men. That's why RP Davies was in the ring with them, because he's a bad man also, but they had a little bit more of a badder attitude than he did in the ring. But I was curious on what the adrenaline was like in terms of going into the ring, your first match. And I know it's got to be different than being a boxer, and you're in the ring with somebody, to Mickey Barnes. I mean, he's a big man. You fought a lot of great guys in the ring, but he's a little bigger than some of those guys. I mean, what was that like in terms of waiting for your name to be called and then going out in the ring for the first time for your first career match against the bad lad Mickey Barnes?
I was more nervous for that than I was for any of my boxing matches. And I know that sounds crazy, but it was true. And the reason being was because I know how to fight. It's all I've done since being a young boy. And when I got in a boxing ring, I never thought about it. It just happened. What happened then just came out of me. And, I didn't really have to give too much thought to it or whatnot. I just flowed. And whatever came out of me on the night is what came out of me. Whereas with wrestling, anyone who's been involved in wrestling or does wrestling knows that it's a little bit different to that. And I had so much going through my head and so much worry of not looking great out there or not doing the job correctly or really failing. Never felt the fear of failure more than that night. And so, it was a very, very nerve-wracking night, but also a really great night because the match went great and the fans loved it and I enjoyed it, and that's all we can hope for, really. And I felt a real sense of accomplishment because I knew that I was by far from a master of the art of wrestling. And so a very beginner, a beginner rung. As a beginner rung, I knew I'd kind of accomplished my goal. And very, very proud of that night.
And you absolutely should be. And congratulations to you, and obviously to the bad lad Mickey Barnes and his stable for helping you and having a great match. It was definitely a great match. Everybody should check it out. Everybody should also check out all the great things that Grand Pro Wrestling has to offer here. I was also curious then, RP, and how's it like to have your own music now, finally?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, very, very good. Again, these are the opportunities that have come from wrestling. And, you know, my life sometimes feels like some sort of crazy comic book sometimes, you know, because things are happening that, you know, I would never anticipate. But luckily, I got the opportunity to go to a recording studio not long ago with a friend of mine that I've met through the wrestling business called Shotty Horror. He was a famous battle rapper in Great Britain, and you should definitely listen to him. You should definitely have a little listen to him when you get a chance. But he's become a friend through the business. He's a massive wrestling fan himself. And yeah, he offered for me to go down to his recording studio with his band and his producers and come up with my very own theme music, which again is like, you know, a massive, massive dream of mine, you know, like a massive opportunity to do something that, you know, as a kid, I could have only dreamed about. And yeah, just amazing. Got to sit in the studio and kind of help create music that I thought would get people up for a fight. So yeah, it was great.
It is great music. Everybody needs to listen to it. And most importantly, everybody needs to, once again, go out and watch an RP Davies match, because you are going to enjoy them. And you are definitely going to feel those chants of RPD, 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 as we are here on the Sports Report for a few more minutes with the former International Masters champion, also the owner of the Davies Boxing Gym. That is RP Davies here. What an honor it is to have him on the show, and could not think of a better way to continue to celebrate our 2-year anniversary on the Sports Report than talking about one of the most important guests we've ever had on here in show history, and that is the great RP Davies, who's doing a phenomenal job now on behalf of Grand Pro Wrestling. And I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, and we're here on Sportanarium, the #1 global radio station, for a few more minutes talking with the great RP Davies and his journey that has led him to being a champion as a boxer to now soon to be as a champion as a wrestler. RP, the Royal Rumble just passed, and I know you are a huge wrestling fan, obviously now being in the business. I got to ask you, and what were your thoughts on the Royal Rumble?
I loved it. Yeah, I loved it. The Royal Rumble for me has always been kind of my favourite event since being a little kid, because I think it gives you the most chance to kind of be surprised, and, you know, it's great to see guys return and come back and kind of get shocked. So yeah, it was great. But from my own point of view, Edge won it, didn't he? You know, sorry if that's a spoiler to anybody, but yeah, Edge won. But I mean, I grew up in that era. You know, I grew up in the Attitude Era, and then go into the kind of the Ruthless Aggression era. And Edge was just a big part of my childhood growing up. So to see him come back at nearly 50-year-old and win it was great for me. Brilliant. And I loved it. I love an underdog story anyway, and he definitely got one to come back from such adversity like he has and redirect himself. You know, in a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of my own story. So in a completely different way, mine's through the boxing or whatnot, but he had adversity and he's overcome it. And to come back on the biggest stage now, main event WrestleMania, what a success story. So yeah, I thought it was fantastic.
Absolutely. And we're about the same age. So the Attitude Era is where we grew up in. And Edge was a huge part of that. Obviously, Christian, who came back also in the Royal Rumble, and Jeff Hardy was also a huge part of the Attitude Era. And I think it speaks to the talent that they have, that they're able to, in their 40s, and in some cases like Edge, near 50, to be able to pull off that type of moment and to keep themselves in condition. And especially Edge, who before last year had been out of the ring for years. I mean, we never thought that Edge was coming back. I mean, Edge was a name that you never heard about was coming back to wrestle. It was always Shawn Michaels, Undertaker, but you never heard about Edge coming back. And for him to be able to pull that off, I think was a tremendous accomplishment. Congratulations to him. But I know that one of your all-time favorite wrestlers is a 3-time Royal Rumble winner, and I believe he's the only 3-time winner, and that is the Rattlesnake, Stone Cold Steve Austin. And I know you were hoping for Stone Cold to find a way to come into the Rumble, because you mentioned that on Twitter.
There's only one Stone Cold in there. If Stone Cold Steve Austin hadn't been in that match, I probably wouldn't have been on this show, because I would have probably got into some heart attack, heart failure attack. That would have been too many childhood memories coming flooding back to me all at once. So no, I was a big Stone Cold fan. You know, a massive hero of mine growing up. I was only 10, 11, 12 when he was, you know, hitting his peak, 97, 98 coming through. And yeah, he was just a great character and a great hero, you know, of mine. And yeah, big Stone Cold Steve Austin fan.
I was in high school throughout most of the Attitude Era, like 99, 2000, 2001 into 2002. And Stone Cold was a huge part of that. Him and The Rock and Triple H, The Undertaker, Edge, who we just mentioned. And Every week you would
Great
all
times,
you do
great
was,
times.
every week all you would do was count down to Raw and Nitro. All you could think about, for me at least, was when I was in school, all I would do is just in my head just daydream from Monday to Thursday. All I would say to myself is, I just got to get to Friday so I can think about wrestling. And then Monday was like all I did in my classes, because I wasn't the greatest of students, and it was like I wasn't as interested in it. All I could think about was, I can't wait for Raw. What's going to happen on Nitro? I can't wait for Raw. And then it was like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It was like, I got 5 days, and school was like, oh my God. But that was how the Attitude Era was. You think about so many talent that was in that era. It might be the greatest era of wrestling. Ruthless Aggression was very good, like Cena, Orton, Batista. But I don't know, man. There was something about the Attitude Era that even to this day, you see a lot of these guys come back here and there. I mean, Kane was another example who was in the Royal Rumble, and Kane was a huge part of the Attitude Era. So there's something where I think we look back now, because obviously now we're in our 30s, and that's kind of like a nostalgic period for us, kind of like in the Attitude Era when everybody looked at the Hulk Hogan era, the rock and wrestling era, where everybody pointed to that and said, oh my God, that was such a great time, it was such a great era. So I think for us, that 20-year peak now in terms of how fondly we look back on that era, I think is why that the Attitude Era is looked upon so fondly by us. But speaking of somebody from the Attitude Era for a little bit who was a part of it, but is a huge part of the WWE now from a backstage side of it as a producer and somebody who's helped train a lot of wrestlers on behalf of NXT, and that's William Regal. And William Regal has been one of the most important wrestlers for a very long time. He was a champion in WCW. He's had a very long career in the WWE. And what was that like in terms of meeting William Regal?
Just amazing. I grew up a massive fan of William Regal. He was always billed from my hometown, Blackpool, and there was always a connection there because of that. And then when I got into wrestling myself, just through contacts that I've got in my hometown, WWE NXT came to Blackpool for a show, a takeover show, and I got the opportunity to meet him, and he came down to the gym, and he was just such a lovely gentleman, and he was great to my dad, great to me. He spent time with me in the ring, took me into the ring and showed me some techniques and stuff like that, which again is, massive boyhood dreams coming true of, someone that you looked up to as a kid, actually spending time with you and trying to help you in a kind of a new path. But yeah, I can't speak highly enough of Regal. He's just a great guy, and I'm lucky to say he's kept in contact with me ever since. And, we talk occasionally via email and that. And yeah, just a great help to my career.
Absolutely. And he's one of the most important wrestlers because of what he's meant to the business. And his story is one that a lot of people can really learn a lot from. And he's been in a lot of different situations, but yet who he is today is he's one of the most important people in the business. I mean, if you think about it, Triple H is the guy for the WWE, but William Regal is like number 2 or number 3. I mean, that shows you how influential an influence that he has in terms of wrestling and young wrestlers. And obviously somebody like RP, who's been a great champion in boxing, but is now transitioning into wrestling. William Regal is extremely important and vital to learn from. So we can certainly see why that is. And another guy you had a chance to meet is, again, somebody who looked like him a little bit. I know he's from a different part of the world, but he's kind of in a way a part of the same world. And that's Finn Balor. And obviously Finn Balor has had a lot of success. He's been one of the most influential wrestlers of this era.
Did you say I look like Finn Balor?
A little bit. I see some resemblances. I see some resemblances a little bit.
Tom, I will take that. For a man who's been punched in the face for 10 years, I will take that all day long. Finn Balor. I look like Finn Balor. I will have that.
So you got to talk to us then about what it was like in meeting Mr. Balor, and what was that like for our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium?
Just great. I mean, when I went to the NXT show, where we were lucky enough to kind of have a walk backstage and meet a lot of the superstars, and I can't, again, there was nobody that wasn't lovely. They were all really great and really giving with the time. And, Finn Balor was one of those. We got a chance to, have a chat with him after his match. And he was just a gent, just a gent. And at the time when I met Finn, I was boxing and wrestling wasn't on the agenda. So he knew I'd just boxed, and we kind of just talked about that. I just informed him I'd been boxing at the same venue the night before. And to be honest, he just seemed genuinely interested in that. And so we talked about the boxing. But yeah, just a great guy. And again, someone from a wrestling standpoint and perspective that I massively look up to because, you know, he's fantastic. And I love what he's doing at NXT now. And yeah, I watch his career very closely.
In a lot of ways, he's this generation's Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels. You think about him, Daniel Bryan, you want to throw in Dolph Ziggler, fine by me. I mean, those wrestlers are, again, the generation's Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels. You want to throw in even a Rey Mysterio as a reference. I mean, that's the kind of wrestler that Finn Balor is, and he's somebody that's generational. CM Punk, you could throw in there, even though he's been out of the ring now for a while, but that's the kind of name and reputation that Finn Balor has. So he's one of the most important wrestlers. He is a wrestler that a lot of wrestlers should watch tape on in terms of how he conducts himself and the types of moves that he performs in the ring. So I could definitely see why that you wanted to meet him. But I was also curious because we've mentioned it a few different times here, and I would be remiss if we didn't mention it, and that you are the owner of the Davis Boxing Gym. And talk about that, what it does for a worldwide audience here, in a lot of ways, how it's helped you into the transition of being a boxer to wrestler.
Yeah, I mean, the gym itself, my gym, it's owned by myself and my dad, and it's something I'm unbelievably proud of. We created the gym when I was boxing, and it literally just started as a place for me to train with dad in private, and that was the starting point of us, you know, and it certainly served its purpose for that. So when I was boxing, me and my dad worked out of there, we trained out of there, and we brought sparring down to there, and it was great. But then when I retired, we had this gym, and, you know, not a lot of use for it really anymore, because at the same time, although I was and always will be a massive fan of boxing, as I told you, I was a little bit bitter about the sport. I felt that I'd kind of been a little bit hard done to at first, and so we had to think of, you know, what we could do. And the more thought we gave, you know, that's where my dad's passion for the sport and my own passion for the sport came out, because I truly believe boxing can be for everybody. I really do. Yes, elite fighters, you know, are going to be really good and really tough and really fit and all these sort of things. But, you know, boxing doesn't necessarily even to be, it can be used for numerous reasons. And, you know, if you are slightly overweight, you want to lose weight and it's a fun way of getting your cardio in, there's that. If you're an underconfident person and you want to learn a little bit of self-defense, it can work in that way. And so really, I designed the gym, and the whole motto of the gym was literally for everybody. So I wanted it to appeal for, yes, your elite fighters who want to compete and want to box, but also for the people who don't feel they fit in gyms and they don't feel that they get a given time in gyms. Because the way me and my dad look at it is, if you pay money to come in our gym and you walk through our doors, you get given just as much time as anybody. Whether you are the best person in the gym or the worst, it makes no difference to us. What matters is that you have given your time to us, and so, you know, we believe you deserve it back. And yeah, I'm unbelievably proud of the gym, and we've got such a great array of people who use it, and really loyal people who've stood by me. And, you know, that has followed me right through my boxing career. Then people who come to the gym who always bought tickets to come watch me fight, they still buy tickets to come watch me wrestle now. And it all works hand in hand. It all works hand in hand. And yeah, it's one of the best achievements of my life, was that gym, making that gym.
Congratulations to you, and cannot thank you enough for all that you do with the Davis Boxing Gym and all the people that you've made a difference in their lives. And obviously you and your father have helped continue to grow the sport of boxing, and also, most importantly, make a difference in people's lives. And that's what it's all about. And RP, I was also curious when it comes to wrestling, in terms of, what are your goals? I mean, where do you see yourself in the wrestling business in the next few years? I mean, what are some of your goals?
It's so tough to say. I mean, when I started out, just having a match was the goal. Just having a match, and to be able to say that I've been a boxer, but also I've been able to have a full wrestling match and not mess it up. You know, that was the goal. But the more I've got into it, the more I've fallen in love with it. I've fallen in love with it more now, learning the intricacies of it and the stuff that goes on backstage, and, you know, more sort of the production side of it. I want to stay involved in it. You know, I really do. And I want to see, just like I did in boxing, I want to see how far I can go. That's the aim now. So I'm not going to say anything stupid like I want to win the Royal Rumble or headline headline WrestleMania. I don't mean that. What I mean is, I'd like to just see how far I can get in this sport, and I want to see how the story ends. The story's been interesting so far, so I just want to see where it leads and what the climax is.
RPD, listen, never say never, my friend, because I was watching the Rumble and I was thinking, is RP Davies going to come? I mean, listen, you never know. In the WWE AEW, they always say never, my friend. AEW is out there now. Impact is out there right now. I mean, MLW is out there right now. It is a great time to be a wrestling fan. There is a lot of opportunities out there for somebody who's been a world champion in boxing and has now been a very successful draw for Grand Pro Wrestling. So I would not count you out by a long shot. So stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. There is more wrestling opportunities now than there was in the Attitude Era. So like I said, RP, do not count yourself out. Never say never. So I might want you to main event next year's WrestleMania.
Yeah, there you go. You just never know, Tom. But if that ever does happen, you can certainly get a ticket. I'll get you tickets to come watch.
I would be honored. I'd be humbled and privileged. And most importantly, we'd definitely be cheering you on. Hopefully I can get that RPD audio played as your entrance. But before we get your closing thoughts and ask you about one or two moments that stand out most in your boxing and wrestling career, I also wanted to ask you, I know it's been a while, though, since you've been in the ring. I know it's been a while since Grand Pro Wrestling has been back out there. But later this year, what is that going to feel to finally be able to be back in the ring? Because I know it's been a while. I know it's been very hard. It's been hard for the business. It's been hard for the wrestlers. It's been hard for the fans. But what's that feeling going to be like when you finally get that opportunity to be back in the ring later this year with Grand Pro Wrestling?
I think it's going to be amazing. It's always great to be in the ring. And had this not have happened, I think it would have been great to be in the ring. But I think now this is going to make it really, really special. And that's the difference, because it isn't just about the wrestling. It's about everything we've lost. And I can kind of relate that to wrestling in a way. You know, we're all social distancing as a human race. We're all got masks on. We're all staying away from each other. We're not seeing our family. We're not seeing our friends. And when these restrictions lift, and we do get back to things like pro wrestling, like all the passions that we have in life, you know, whatever that might be, I don't think it's ever going to feel, or you're going to appreciate it more than when it does come back. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be a really special atmosphere. I think the fans are going to absolutely love it, because they're going to be the first time they're going to be able to, you know, actually stand with other people and kind of enjoy something as a collective. And from my point of view, you know, it's going to be great to go out there and entertain them and feel like I'm doing something good for them. So, yeah, I cannot wait to get back. I cannot wait, and I just hope it's soon.
And we cannot wait to watch you in the ring with Grand Pro Wrestling and see what happens with your character and see what happens with all the great things that Grand Pro Wrestling has to offer. And that's why we cannot wait. And these restrictions have to end sooner rather than later. But before we get your closing thoughts, and I know, RP, you have had a lot of moments that stand out as a boxer and a wrestler. But I was curious for our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium, if there's one or two moments that stand out most in boxing and or wrestling. And it can be one or two in boxing and one or two in wrestling if you want. So for our worldwide audience here, if there's one or two moments that stand out most in your career in boxing and wrestling, the floor is yours.
I mean, there's that many, but I think more than anything, what stands out from my boxing career is we had some great wins, and, you know, we had some great nights of celebration, and I won little titles, and we had big results and stuff like that. And that was all great, and that will always be with me. But I think for me, from a boxing perspective, what will always stay with me more than anything will be the times on the road with my dad, when we used to drive up and down the country, going to different gyms in backwater parts of cities and towns and stuff, so that we could get this training in. And now, with hindsight, I just see that they were some of the, you know, the best times of bonding with my dad that I ever had, because the chats we had and the laughs we had up and down the country on the road. And that will always stick with me now, because no matter what happens, I'll always remember them times. And only did it make me a better fighter, it made me closer to my dad, which I can only appreciate. So from a boxing point of view, that would be that. And from a wrestling point of view, it would be meeting Johnny and him giving me the opportunity to go and have my first match. And, you know, my first feud, I would say, that first feud with the Bad Lads in general was just a great opportunity for me, and, you know, it all went brilliant. And I think it told a good story as well for our younger fans who were watching. It was all about the kind of the anti-bully and not putting up with bullies and trying to fight back and trying to, you know, stand your ground. And I honestly believe that was worthwhile work as well. So although we put good matches on and it was all entertaining and everything, I think the story behind it meant more than anything, and I'm very, very proud of that.
Absolutely, and you definitely should be. And a rising tide lifts all boats, and we definitely know that RP Davies is going to be that rising tide that is going to lift us. And ladies and gentlemen, let your hearts not be troubled. We will definitely get back to normal, and RP Davies will help us lead back to normal because of all the great things he is going to do in the ring and outside the ring. Now, as a superstar with Grand Pro Wrestling, and we cannot wait to see how his character develops. He is definitely the true underdog, but he always finds a way to get the job done, and he never gives up. In a lot of ways, he's kind of like the John Cena, not so much the Rocky of Grand Pro Wrestling, but the John Cena of Grand Pro Wrestling. And that's why we cannot wait to see RP Davies with his 5-knuckle shuffle like punches in the ring. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for that. But for you, my friend, I want to give you the floor. I want to give any closing thoughts. I also want you to plug where listeners get in touch with you, whether it's your Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, also anything related to the Davis Boxing Gym, so our worldwide audience can keep up to date with that and find a way to help out or get more information with that. And obviously, it's a tremendous honor to speak with you and to share your story. And anytime you want to come on and talk some wrestling or anything else on your mind, we'd love to have you here. The floor is always yours here on the Sports Report. And for you, my friend, and I want to give you any closing thoughts, anything you want to share to your fans, your worldwide audience here listening, and also plug any social media related so we can keep up to date and follow all the great things that you are doing. So I can't thank you enough, my friend, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tom. Well, first, I'd just like to thank yourself for having me on. It's been an honour. It's very nice that you've thought about me to come on, and I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I hope that your listeners have enjoyed it, and I hope that they've took something from this. So thank you for listening, guys. And then from myself, like, who knows? You said it before. You never know what's going to happen, and that literally is the story of my life. So far, I could never have written or wrote where it's going. It just seems to jump. It jumps from point to point, but it's certainly an enjoyable ride. So yeah, if you want to follow me and you want to keep up to date on what I'm doing, on Twitter I'm RPD Fighter, on Facebook I'm Ryan Paul Davies, and I think I am on Instagram. And then again, if you want to follow my gym and see what's going on there, my gym on Twitter is Davies Boxing Gym, DAVIES Boxing Gym, and the same on Facebook and Instagram. So yeah, if you want to listen and then have a little look at what we're doing, that'd be great too.
Absolutely, and it's a tremendous honor to speak with you. I can't thank you enough for all that you do. I'm looking forward to watching you in the ring. I'm looking forward to seeing how your character develops, and most importantly, I cannot wait to hear those chants one more time of RPD, RPD, RPD. It's great that I'm doing it, Ryan, but I want to hear those many fans in Grand Pro Wrestling chant that, because we need some normalcy. We need those crowds. Yeah, it's been too long, my friend. I'm going crazy as we speak, but obviously you're helping us go a little less crazy, and it's a tremendous honor. And one more time, a huge shout out to the entire team.
It's good to hear you chant it. It's good to hear you chant it. It's nice to remind me what it sounds like. Yeah.
Well, we'll do it for you every week. I mean, listen, anytime you want to come on and hear those chants, I mean, feel free, RP. You can come on. The floor is always yours. I mean, I know Lakey and Arv wouldn't have a problem with that. So I think that we could make that happen. So we'll definitely figure that out. But most importantly, we're honored to have you here on the show and looking forward to seeing what the future brings to you. And I can't thank you enough. And we're looking forward to speaking with you soon.
Brilliant. Cheers. Thanks for having me on, and I will speak to you again.
As we're here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show with one of our #1 boxers and #1 wrestlers, and that is RP Davies, who was the International Masters Champion as a boxer, where he won 12-1 in 13 professional fights, and he's transitioned now to be a successful wrestler on behalf of Grand Pro Wrestling, and he's also the owner of the Davis Boxing Gym, as I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, and stay tuned here on the Sports Report with our next guest, and that's Ashley Yu, the assistant coach for the Dominican University women's basketball team, as we are here on Sportanarium, the #1 radio station, as we were just with RPD, 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 RP Davies, as I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, and stay tuned for more information here on Sportanarium, the #1 global radio station. We're at www.sportanarium.com, as we're here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show. Ladies and gentlemen, what a treat we have in store here on the Sports Report, the #1 Global Sports Show here on Sportanarium. And our guest here is somebody I've wanted on for quite a while. And I've been very familiar with her work back here in New York when she was an assistant coach over at CCNY for the women's basketball team under our very good friend Michael Williams, who was the head coach last year. And of course, the head of the Williams Advancement Agency, and where she coached the likes of Riley Bayham, one of the greatest players maybe in the entire history of the CUNY-Acton women's basketball. In her own right, she was a great player at Hunter College, and she's now doing a phenomenal job as an assistant coach for our Dominican University Stars women's basketball team, who just kicked off action here last weekend. She is doing a great job there representing Dominican University, and she's done a great job representing us here at home. And she's also a native Staten Islander, so automatically, we got to support her. And then without further ado here, on the Sports Report, the number one global sports show, and that is the coordinator of intramurals, camps, and club sports, and the assistant women's basketball coach for our Dominican University Stars, our very good friend, Ashley Yu. Coach, how are you, my friend?
I'm great, Thomas. Thank you for having me on here. What an introduction. Thank you so much.
We get that a lot, Coach, over the past 2 years on the show, so we've definitely gotten that a lot. When you say it means a lot, because we know that it means a lot to you. And obviously, as always, a huge shout out to Michael Williams, who did a phenomenal job, obviously, at CCNY as the head coach for the women's basketball team last year. Is also doing a phenomenal job.
Definitely.
The advancement agency. He is all over the place. And a huge shout out to Coach Williams. Cannot thank him enough. And we wouldn't be where we are today on the Sports Report on Sportanarium if it wasn't for Coach Williams' support. But, Coach, congratulations on getting back out there on the court. I know a lot of schools haven't had that opportunity to go out and play. And before we talk about last week's game, I wanted to talk about first, for our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium, what did it mean for you, along with the rest of the team over at Dominican University, to be able to be back on the court last weekend?
We were extremely grateful. We were actually able to start back up in October, but it was kind of a weird process how we started. We weren't allowed to do any contact. We had to do groups of 5. So we had the big curtain come down in the half of the gym. So we had half the team on one side, half the team on the other side, which was weird because usually around this time, this is when the freshmen, the transfers get to meet our veterans and the returners. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. So people were wearing masks. Conditioning is kind of hard through that way. We couldn't go full 5-on-5. It wasn't until maybe like the last 2 weeks of practice before Thanksgiving where we could finally go 5-on-5. So it's been weird, since COVID kind of happened, but we understand that not a lot of other schools and teams get this opportunity like we do. And like you said, we just kicked off our game last week, and we're just super grateful to even be able to play basketball during a pandemic like this.
Absolutely. And a huge shout out to everybody who made this happen here, the girls and the coaches, obviously Coach Rivas, who took over here earlier this past year. So everybody who made this happen definitely deserves some applause and congratulations. But I was curious also for a worldwide audience then, Coach, on how was that adjustment like in terms of coaching with all these different conditions and restrictions that are in place? I know you've been a player, you've been a coach, obviously CCNY, so you get it. You've been in the girls' shoes, and you're also a coach now. So how was that adjustment like in terms of these new norms that we have, quote unquote, now when it comes to getting back out there on the court?
I mean, it's weird. So like typical stuff you would be able to do during a regular season, you can't do. So usually you would have your benches on the same side as the score table. Seats would be right next to each other. Everyone clearly doesn't have a mask, but now the chairs are staggered. We have to be 6 feet apart. Some schools, like the school we played at, Aurora, we were able to sit on the same side as the score table. But I know our contest back at home, we have the score table on the complete opposite side of the gym. So not being able to hear each other during halftime. Usually during halftime and pregame, we would go into our locker rooms, draw up our matchups and stuff like that, have those pregame talks, halftime talks, and postgame talks, but we can't even do that due to certain limited capacity in some of those rooms. So it's been real weird. When we were playing at Aurora during our halftime and pregame talks, we met in the corner, kind of like a AAU style, and music was playing. It was super loud. Talking under your mask, you'd have to scream even louder than you usually would. So all these kind of things that kind of get in the way. But again, we're just still super grateful that we can even play. So it's just like we just have to adjust.
How have you adjusted to the environment without fans and that natural noise? I mean, how has that been like for that adjustment?
I definitely think it's super tough, only because, especially being at home, we haven't had our first home game yet, but definitely the crowd makes a difference. A lot of times when a team is down, you feed off of your fans' energy. So when you get that big bucket and you hear the crowd cheer and scream and stuff like that, you're just like, all right, on to the next play. But not having that, you kind of have to rely on yourself, rely on your team, and rely on the coaches. So it's definitely also another weird adjustment that we have to just keep on pushing on.
Oh, we know that you'll definitely push on. We know that the rest of the team will definitely push on. That's why we're excited for Dominican University Stars women's basketball. And of course, they're in action here this Friday and Saturday. So huge home games coming up here in a very shortened season here in the NACC. And it's a season that has only 9 games you guys were supposed to play. You have 8 games on the calendar at this point. You've played 1 already. I mean, how do you assess then these games? I mean, you're used to being in the CUNY. I know where we had in the CUNY, you'd have between 14 and 15 conference games. You play a season where you have anywhere between 22 and 28 games, depending on how well you do in the postseason. But this season, it's literally a third of that. I mean, how do you assess these games? And overall, how do you go into the season then knowing that this is such a short season?
We just have to keep encouraging our girls, again, just to be grateful that we have a season. It's also weird because usually we would have a lot of non-conference games. But again, in speaking with the staff and the rest of the conference, everyone's agreed, whether you opted in or opted out, those who've opted in, we have to stay in state. That goes with a lot of the restrictions that the state has. So the schedule setup is also a little weird that we're not used to, because we would play back to back. So last week, Friday, we would have played Aurora, and then Saturday we played Aurora. However, Friday, our game got postponed due to some testing protocols. But then this coming week, we play Friday, Saturday. Then again, Friday, Saturday. Usually games are spread out throughout the week, either like a Tuesday and a Friday or something like that. So having to play back to back and then making those quick adjustments for a quick turnaround for another game the next day, that's been also super weird. But we do a lot of film work and a lot of scouting reports. So we do a lot of personnel and prepping during practices. So we take the week of whoever we play. So like this week when we play Benedictine, we do our scouting reports, we do our film work, and then we kind of implement all that stuff at practice. And going into the game, we should be well prepared.
Do you then look at these games where they might mean twice as much as they would have meant, let's say, if it was the normal 14, 15, 16 game, whatever conference season it normally was, or even last year when you were at CCNY and the CUNYAC when you played about that many games? I mean, so do you look at these games in a way where almost like one game means, let's say, double what it normally would mean?
I definitely would say that, especially for our seniors that may not be looking to come back for a 5th year, because we're well aware that everyone was allowed their free year. But those that may be done, this is their last hurrah. This goes for high school players too. Like, this is your last hurrah. So you don't really feel this until you get towards the end of your career. But, you start to realize that your games are limited. So what would have been a 22, 28 game season is now a 9-game season before the postseason. So it's like, you really have to play every game like it's your last game, because you never know, especially in the middle of a pandemic. A game can get canceled, it can get postponed. So that 9-game season can go from 9 to 6. So it's really one of those things where it's just like, put your heart on the court and then leave it all out there.
Oh, absolutely. And we know that the girls are going to definitely do that along with the rest of the team. And that's why we're excited to have you on here, Coach, and talk about that. And I know the first game of the season wasn't what we hoped for, but recap for us the game against Aurora, the second game of what was supposed to be a back-to-back. Obviously, the first game you mentioned got canceled, but the second game you guys played last week in the afternoon. And first quarter, you guys were neck and neck with them. And then the second quarter, it just seemed like Aurora went on a run where they couldn't not score a basket. It was just like they were on a run and they were red hot. And that was kind of the difference in the game. I mean, what are your overall impressions then of the first game back against Aurora?
This was our first test. That's what Coach Rivas and I were saying, after the game. We didn't have a scrimmage prior to this. We didn't really get a test run to see how we would look against another team. We've only really seen what we look like playing against ourselves. And everyone knows, I think that's not the real test. I think what it came down to really, it was just our defense. Our offense, we didn't even run all the sets that we had. We had 2 sets, maybe called 2 sets, and we were getting great looks. Like you said, Stephanie Huggins was going off. She ended the game with 27, and then we had another junior, Hannah Current, had 16 and 8 for the game, almost a double-double. I think it also came down to just inexperience. Aurora has their senior who's, best player in the conference, finished the game with 30. She had a bunch of pieces around her, and I hate to blame it on this too, but the the pandemic kind of just cut into our conditioning. So we weren't exactly where we wanted to be per se. Our rotations were working. I think it just came down to wanting to push through it. We didn't have the conditioning to do so on the defensive end. So we were compromised on defense. That's just really what it came down to. Also, you're pretty neck and neck in terms of rebounding. We shot about 40%. Aurora shot 41%. We had 64 attempts. So we were pretty neck and neck there. But really where it came down to was Aurora had 14 turnovers for the game and we had 30. So that's the story right there.
Well, you're giving them chances to score, Coach. You're giving them more possessions, right? That's always what it comes down to in basketball. Who has the ball more? If you're going to give them more possessions, it's either that and rebounds, right? Those are the two most important things is how do you rebound off the glass and then defense and turnovers. And unfortunately, that's why you came up short. But we know that you guys are going to get it together and win these games coming up here this weekend. And then I was curious then also for our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium and hearing you guys kind of get off to the slow start in the first game. And although we know that you guys are going to pick it back up here, are you relying a lot more on the upper class members of the team? Like, for example, a Hannah, like, for example, a Stephanie, where they're the ones that have to step up here and keep everybody calm, because obviously we know the first game wasn't what we expected, what we hoped for. But at the end of the day, I got to think the upper class members here of the team, those juniors and seniors, are going to have to play even more of a role in terms of leadership on and off the court to keep everybody calm, keep everybody collected so we can get back on track here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were also missing one of our seniors, Alicia Markley. So we're going to have her back the following weekend. But that was another big thing. We definitely emphasized to our returners and our veterans that they have to take a lead on creating that culture and kind of demanding the best for the team. And we also emphasize this to our freshmen. Everyone on our team has a voice. All their voices matter. We definitely emphasize accountability because a freshman should be able to hold a senior accountable the same way a senior should be able to hold a sophomore accountable. Demanding the best from the team throughout, whether it's from a freshman or a senior or a coach or whatever it is. So that's definitely something that we say. But one thing I will say about our group is that we are extremely resilient. Although we are very young, we're very resilient. I have every faith in us that we'll bounce back for our next game coming up.
We definitely have faith that the Dominican University Stars women's basketball team is going to get back on track. And one of those reasons why the Dominican University Stars women's basketball team is going to get back on track and why we have faith in this team is our guest here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show. And that's our assistant coach to the women's basketball team, our very good friend, Ashley Yu, as I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice. And for more information on the Sports Report, you can go to sportsreportx.com and listen to all of our archives. You can go to soundcloud.com/the Sports Report 2019. You can also check us out now on YouTube, the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show. And also, as always, a huge shout out to the entire team here at Sportanarium. And that includes Lakey, Arv, Danny, Dale, Sean, Steve, Sasha, everybody at Sportanarium that has made us the #1 global sports show. And we're now honored to be on the Sportanarium's YouTube page. And you have over 47,000 subscribers now on Sportanarium's YouTube page. So you can follow Sportanarium on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, where you can check out all clips related to the Sports Report. And you can check out all of our content, all of our shows after it plays on Sportanarium. And of course, you can catch us on Sportanarium Fridays, 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 to 6 Central Standard Time, 10 to 12 UK time. Saturdays, the same time. Sundays, the news report comes back also from 5 to 7, 4 to 6 Central Time, 10 to 12 UK time. And you can do that always at www.sportanarium.com. That's www.sportanarium.com. And also remind you to like Sportanarium on Facebook at Sportanarium Media. And as always, want to give a huge shout out once again to Michael Williams of the Williams Advancement Agency. Everybody needs to follow the Williams Advancement Agency on Instagram at Williams Advancement Agency. Make sure you follow Coach Williams and all the great things that he is doing, not only for us, but for the likes of Ashley, who's on the show with us right now, Xavier Shernack, who was also on the show not too long ago, Colin Wright, a who's who of coaches are under the guide of Coach Williams and his leadership, and also Terry Alls, who we had on the show not too long ago. Like I said, I lost count on how many great people that Coach Williams is leading, and everybody once again needs to go to WilliamsAdvancementAgency.com for more information on the Williams Advancement Agency, and also follow the Williams Advancement Agency Agency on Instagram at Williams Advancement Agency. And we are here with one of our favorite coaches right now on the Sports Report, continuing to celebrate our 2-year anniversary. And that's our very good friend, Ashley Yu, who's a pretty good player in her own right at Hunter College and also was assistant coach at CCNY for the Beavers for the women's basketball team. And Coach, I was curious also in talking about the adjustment for you. Obviously, we know you from being a CUNYAC player and a city player and a city coach. And what's the adjustment like from coming into CCNY to now where you're at Dominican University? Talk about that for us here on Sportanarium.
It's definitely been a big adjustment for me, only because, I was born and raised in the city. So I was surrounded by traffic, taxis, noises, lights, and everything like that out there. And then coming out here to Illinois, it's like more residential, it's quieter, it's definitely colder, like people had warned me. We have a camp, like an actual campus life. CCNY, we had skyscrapers, and although we also had a little bit of a campus feel, it's not as suburban. So that's been a big difference for me, just like geography.
Has that been something that you appreciate more in a sense? Because if you think about it, when you're in the city so much, you're almost in that hustle and bustle, and you're thinking about catching that train or catching that bus, or you got to be there at a certain time. But at Dominican, it's a slower lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. It's bucolic, the landscape. The people might be more friendlier. The people might appreciate life more. Whereas in the city, as you know, being a city person, it's like, get out of my way. I got to be where I have to be, and you have to be there at a certain time. But Dominican, I gotta think it's not like that at all. I mean, talk to me about your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, I completely agree. The first week that I was here, just like walking down the street and stuff, random people kind of just say hi to you, and I'm just not used to that. I'm just like, whoa, like being from New York, nobody kind of just says hi to each other. So that's also been a big adjustment. But it is a lot of fun because I'm a big perspective person. So getting the perspective and being a city kid, and then moving out to more suburban, a quieter area, has definitely given me more perspective as well, where it's just like there's more out there outside of the city, and vice versa. If you come from the suburban, going into the city every once in a while is definitely going to give you some more perspective, and I think it just expands your point of view on life and everything like that.
Oh, absolutely, no question about it. And there's always a huge shout out to everybody at Dominican University. It is a wonderful campus, it is a wonderful school, and it is a wonderful athletic program. And one of the reasons why it's also a wonderful athletic program is our head coach for the women's basketball team who took over this past year, and that's Antonio Rivas. And talk about Coach Rivas and how important he's been to the team and how important he's been to you as a whole.
Oh, he's been phenomenal. A little bit of background on him, and he was actually used to go to Aurora, so that was his alma mater, and opening up our season was playing Aurora, and that gave him a little bit of edge, so that was really exciting to see. But, he's been really accommodating, understanding that I'm moving from a totally different as a young coach. He's also a young coach. Total props to him, being 25, having his first head coaching job at Dominican. He's been one of the main constants that the team has had, having gone through 2 different head coaches in just 4 years. So this being his 4th year and then taking over as a head coach, was very important for the girls. And then having that culture and style of play that he's implemented has really opened up a different kind of culture for the girls that made them more comfortable to be around and be comfortable on the court with themselves as well. He's definitely helped me out. He's taught me so many things, both on the administrative side and, in basketball, because I'm a very big defensive minded person and he's very offensive minded. So we kind of balance each other out in that way. And I think it's super fun working with him. Like I said, he's been super accommodating. He's been a great friend to me as well.
How important do you think it is to have a coach that can relate to players? You were a player not too long ago, and you were in the shoes of a lot of these players. And Coach Rivas himself is somebody that can relate to all the players on the court, and he can relate to the game himself. And obviously, he's involved in a couple of different other sports. And we've talked a lot about this with other coaches on the show. We've talked about this, obviously, with Coach Clores when he was at CCNY. We talked about this with Coach Chernak and Coach Wright and Coach Alls and a lot of other coaches who've come on the show here over the past 2 years. But from your perspective as somebody who has played and hasn't played not too long ago, how important do you think that is for a coach to be able to relate to their players?
For me, maybe it's a little biased to say, but I definitely think it's super important, only because you understand the physical side, all the hard work, the pain, the sweat, the tears, the blood that you kind of put in for your craft. A lot of coaches will say, I will never make my players do something that I have never done or I cannot do. So, it's like asking your players to run 100 suicides in one practice or 100 sprints. And it's like, whoa, like, I understand getting us into conditioning shape, but that sounds a little ridiculous. And then at some point you have that respect from them where it's just like, yes, I've been where you've been. And then there are other things that you can see off the court. Maybe it's behind the scenes stuff that you understand has to happen for a culture to kind of foster and build and that kind of stuff. So I definitely do think it is important.
Also, talk about for us the other coaches on staff and Coach K and Coach Moore and how instrumental they've been to you and to the rest of the girls on the team.
Oh, they've been super helpful and super phenomenal. So Coach Moore is our post coach. So I am a guard. So I like to think I am well-rounded with a lot of fundamentals and stuff. But because he specializes, he was a post player himself. He went to an NAIA school, won a national championship. So he knows what it takes to build, the work you need to put in to become a great post player. Coach K himself, he went D2 and played overseas as well. And he helped me with the guards and a little bit of our tweeners. So, same perspective there. So they've been super phenomenal helping us out. They're also very defensive minded. So anything that I may not have seen during our practices, we have 3 other coaches that see different things. So all of our players get a different perspective from all 4 coaches, and then they come together, and that's where Dominican basketball is.
That's why we're excited about the team and the games coming up here, and we can't wait to watch them. I was also curious about your other role here at Dominican and what that entails, where you're the coordinator of intramurals, camps, and club sports. And for our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium, talk about that role and maybe how it differs as being the assistant coach here for the women's basketball team.
Yeah, so that role is my administrative role. And basically, I am here to kind of curate an experience for the students for the rest of campus and the faculty and staff where they can feel like they can be a part of athletics in a sense. So, we have our Zumba classes, our yoga classes. We try to implement some free throw shooting contests. We have spike ball contests and stuff like that. So that way they may not be a student athlete, but they can still be around athletics and see the things that we do here and still kind of have fun and be involved on campus as well as with athletics. It's been super tough this year, especially because of the pandemic. It's been limiting a lot of our options in terms of different sports that we can have, clinics and camps and stuff we can't have due to the pandemic. So trying to figure out a way around it has been super tough, but we're definitely going to continue to kind of persist and create those experiences for the rest of campus to have.
We know that you are definitely going to create great experiences for everybody on campus because of your experience, because of your leadership. And that's why we know that everybody's going to do some great things here for the Dominican University, not just for the women's basketball team, but the athletic program as a whole. And that's why they've got the right person at the right time here. I was also curious, Coach, when you were a player and you played at Hunter College, and obviously you had a lot of success there at Hunter. You played with some great players, and we actually covered a number of those last year on the show, and we were highlighting a number of different teams in the CUNYAC, specifically CCNY, your old stomping grounds, and also John Jay. We did a lot with the Bloodhounds of the athletics program for last year. But what are your memories of being a player at Hunter College, and what did you learn from Coach Garrett?
Oh, wow. I still always think back to those days. Those were the best years of my life. It gave me some great friendships that came out of it. And towards my senior year, that was a very special group. Coming as a freshman, we had a completely different kind of culture. I was the only freshman on the team at the time. So imagine how intimidating that is, being the only freshman and then coming on to a team full of veterans. So adjusting to that. And they definitely took me under their wing and helped me create the culture that Hunter is today. So that's been super great. Again, it's the best 4 years of my life. And it's not just the basketball players. All of athletics there was a family. And, that's something I carry with me every day, no matter where I go.
And the Sportsplex was always an interesting place to watch a game. It definitely has a very unique feel at Hunter. And Hunter has always had a good athletics program. It had a lot of good winning teams, a lot of good different winning sports, and a lot of great players. And I know that you played with a couple of players that we actually got to cover quite a bit on last year's show, talking about all the latest happenings in the world of the CUNYAC, and that's Janine Conway and Teresa Lung. And they were great players, and I know that you played with them. You got to see them up close in practice and be with them on the court. And did you see right away that Janine and Teresa were going to be such great players and had the careers that they had at Hunter?
Oh, absolutely. I actually knew Teresa before Hunter. We used to play against each other in high school and outside of our league games in high school. So I actually knew her before Hunter. We weren't as close as we are now before Hunter, only because I've only seen her a few times in a few games. But them coming to Hunter and Janine transferring in, off the bat, you just know their work ethic, how they communicate with the rest of the team was just so special. And I think that's what made our team so special. We always pushed each other. There was always positive peer pressure and, always demanding more from each other, and just always constant support on top of all of that.
It also helped that you were playing with great players, that it allowed you to adjust to your role a little bit differently from the beginning of your career at Hunter to where you were a senior, where you were playing with such great players like Janine and Teresa, and then later on Jada Ponte. I mean, did that kind of help you in terms of adjusting to your role at the end of your career versus the beginning?
I would say a little bit. I definitely do think the veterans that took me under their wing my freshman year helped me kind of foster that mindset, that culture that we started to implement as I moved into my sophomore and then junior year. We had a lot of great veterans when I was a freshman. And then eventually one of them, Kristen Marco, who became an assistant coach for a year or two at Hunter, carried on that tradition with me as well. But definitely playing with a lot of great players that shared that philosophy definitely helped. When one thing went wrong, it wasn't one voice, it was all of ours as a collective. And I think that's what made it so great, so special.
You also look back on maybe your career a little bit more fondly than someone else might because of all the success that you had collectively as a team. Because listen, it would have been great if you would have been scoring 20 plus points a game. But if you guys didn't go into the CUNYAC tournament and have the success that you guys had, maybe you look at your career differently. I mean, do you look back on your career maybe a little bit more fondly also because of the team success that you had throughout the 4 years at Hunter?
I definitely say that could have played a part. But I genuinely think, aside from all the winning, it came from the fact that we wanted to be around each other. We had fun with each other off the court. We were a family. Definitely we can say that. And I think that fostered the reason why we were so successful as well. Again, we just enjoyed each other's company. Off the court, we were all willing to get food and hang out in each other's dorms and just around each other, study together, all that kind of stuff. So off the court is the same thing. We enjoyed each other on and off the court. So looking back, there were some times where before we all had that success, when Jade was a freshman, Teresa coming in as a freshman, we were just starting to figure out how to win. So of course we would have those games that, we should have won, but due to the lack of experience at the time made it a little frustrating, but that never changed our relationship with the rest of the team. So I think winning definitely helped, but even without it, I think we all just enjoyed each other.
What made the 2018 team so special?
A lot of things that we described, it besides winning games, it's just we were a family. That's probably the simplest way I can put it. We all support each other in ways that I can't even describe. And all of that stuff off the court translated on the court. We wanted to be at practices. When we had those bad practices, we had each other's backs to kind of pick each other up and trying to turn it around towards the end of practice or for the next day or into the next game. So there was just an unlimited amount of support that this team had.
Absolutely. And congratulations to you and the girls on all the success that you guys had throughout the 4 years at Hunter. And the program has been one of the top programs for a very long time in the CUNYAC. And obviously, Coach Garrett has a lot to do with that. And then after you graduate Hunter, you get into coaching. I mean, what led you to get into coaching and then become a coach at CCNY?
Going into college, I didn't really know. I was one of those kids that were undecided, didn't really know what they wanted to do. One thing I knew was that I wanted to be around athletics. So off the top of my head, I thought maybe athletic training. Come class time, I realized I wasn't smart enough to do that. So when I was in college, I was also coaching in a travel team that I had played for all throughout my middle school career, which were the NYC Sabres, located in Chinatown, Manhattan. Their philosophy, always to give back. So what I wanted to do was help them coach our younger generation to bring up the next generation of basketball players. And at the time, I didn't know that coaching could be a career. I just knew that I loved doing that aside from playing. And then towards probably my junior, senior year is when I realized, this is probably something I can do. Being in college athletics, working college athletics. So once I graduated, I reached out to a couple other coaches in our conference. It happened to be Coach Williams that was the one that really gave me that shot and that opportunity to coach with him at CCNY.
Coach Williams knows what he's doing. The man is a genius, obviously. That's why we love Coach Williams. So that's why he knows what he's doing, picking great talent like Ashley. And then you bring him up. And Coach Williams is somebody that we've talked about quite a bit on the show over the past year. Obviously, we had on Coach Flores when he was the coach for the men's basketball team, and Coach Murray with the track team at CCNY. Always a shout out to Coach Murray. Cannot thank Coach Murray enough for all of his support and friendship. But talk about Coach Williams for us and what kind of leader and what kind of man he is, because a lot of people might see, the Williams Advancement Agency post on LinkedIn or post on Twitter and Instagram, but there's something about this man that he knows how to connect with people. He's truly a people person. And I'm not just saying this because he supports the Sports Report and he supports me and we've had many conversations. No, I'm saying it because I've actually talked to people that know who Coach Williams is and have done that on an independent basis. So when I say something, I can back things up, but you've got to see it on a day-in-and-day basis. You were with him last year with the program, and you've seen him, how he's developed in such short amount of time, the Williams Advancement Agency. I mean, what kind of person is he?
He's just overall such a genuine guy. When I first met him in just my first interview for the job, I knew off the bat that this was somebody that I wanted to work with and somebody that I wanted to learn from. He knew what he was talking about. He was so confident. And then once I started working with him, I realized how genuine he was. Watching him interact with the rest of the team, he cared about every single one, from a freshman to a senior, to our team managers, to the rest of the administration, to the rest of our coaching staff. You could tell the days where he was tired and, all the hard work that he put in, and he just continued to persist and work through it. And he's just a phenomenal guy. There are really no words I can say to kind of thank him for taking me under his wing and bringing me to where I am today and continuing to support me and things like that. He's just phenomenal.
Oh, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And he has been a mentor and a leader for countless coaches, countless players in the game of basketball over a very long time. He's also doing a phenomenal job now also at St. Peter's with the women's basketball team, obviously with Coach Mark Mitchell there. And he had a great track record, Coach Williams, alongside Coach Mitchell at Fairleigh Dickinson, where they won a national championship. So when you win a national championship and you're involved with all the kind of talent that Coach Williams has been around, you definitely listen to him. You definitely do what he tells you to do. And you definitely listen to him a lot more different than anybody else would. And speaking of CCNY also, you last year with the team had a player that was arguably, again, we said this at the top of the segment here with you, one of the greatest players, I think, to ever play in the CUNYAC. And that's Riley Bayham, and who led the nation in scoring, not just D3, not just the CUNYAC. She led D1 and D2 in scoring. And you think about the games that she had. I mean, there was one game, if I recall correctly, I watched her. She had like 10 threes and 12 threes, and it was 47 points, 40 points. I mean, she was like a video game. I mean, the first thing I got to ask you, coach, is did you try to recruit her to come to Dominican? And on top of that, I mean, what kind of player was that? I mean, you played with Janine, you played with Teresa, you played with Jade. I mean, they're great players, and they're up there, and Janine was right up there alongside Riley as one of the top players in the CUNYAC, but Riley was something special. I mean, what was that like coaching Riley Bayham?
There was no words to describe how grateful I was to be able to coach a player like Riley. Not only was she a phenomenal player, she was a phenomenal kid. She worked hard on and off the court, in the classroom and everything like that. She was real personable. She was the kind of kid that was willing to do the extra at practice, willing to push her teammates, willing to support her teammates, regardless of whether she was having a good day or a bad day. Obviously, coming right off into CCNY, did we know that she was going to lead the nation in scoring? No. We knew she was going to be a conference player. We knew there was no doubt she was going to win Rookie of the Year. But it's just all the hard work that she put in, and also just watching her play and practice. She's absolutely fearless. It didn't matter who we were playing, the competition we were playing. She was in it, and she was on go all the time. And a lot of times there were games that didn't go our way, but that never made her change the way she looked at practices. That never made her change the way she looked at the next game. No matter what she was doing, she was fearless in everything.
I hate to put you on the spot in asking you this question, but I almost got to do it because I know everybody focused on Brooklyn, and Brooklyn was the dominant team in the CUNY Act this year. And obviously we did a lot with John Jay, and John Jay had some great players like Katie Healy, who we talked about quite a bit on the show last year. But after having the year that Riley had, I mean, I almost got to ask you and put you on the spot. Should Riley have been the CUNY Act Player of the Year?
I definitely think so. I would have fought for that as well. I want to say maybe I'm biased because I got to work with her. There's no doubt in my mind that Katie Healy was a great player herself. Again, I could be biased, but I was Team Riley all the way. Just maybe because of the way I see her work and her heart and passion for the game. I definitely believe she should have gotten it.
And so do we. And like I said, we covered Katie, and we know the kind of player that Katie is with John Jay because we did a lot of work with that program. So we know how much time that Katie put into that year because she was also a great soccer player.
Absolutely.
Janine, we talked about quite a bit also on the show with Coach Day. But to me, to put up those kind of numbers, especially on a team where you're getting double teamed and triple teamed and you're literally the only option. And I know why they picked who they picked to be the player of the year in the CUNY Act on the women's side. It's because you go with the person who won the most games. And they did the same thing with Levy. And obviously Doug Levy's a personal friend. But I look at the year that Riley had, when you score 27 points a game and you put up numbers that are probably never going to be broken in terms of the conference play and single season game records and all those other individual accomplishments, I kind of think you make an exception to the rule that you normally just go with the player who was on the best team. That's why I think it was really impressive that Riley had the year she did. That's why I think also on top of that, she should have been the player of the year. And obviously we'll see what happens at the program. And also I got to mention him because I know he's a huge listener. We had him on the show, and he's also doing a lot of great things at St. Joe's for the men's basketball team. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention him. And that's Jason Gordieso, who was also an assistant at CCNY. So do you have a funny Coach Gordieso story or memory? I mean, I'm kind of thinking of it off the top of my head, but I know that Coach will be listening. So if you have a memory or a moment or two or anything you want to add on Coach Gordieso, I know he'll definitely be listening and he'll definitely appreciate it.
Definitely every time I saw him, he was very well dressed. I'll tell you that. So that was my impression. Every time I saw him on game day, I'm like, whoo, I got to up my dress up game every time.
That's how I feel like when I speak to him, even on Instagram, and when he DMs me. Should I be dressed in a suit and tie? Should I slick my hair back? Because otherwise, Coach Gordieso definitely has that businessman Wall Street vibe, and obviously that's his day life. So obviously, a huge shout out to Coach Gordieso and everybody at CCNY, and most especially our guest here on the Sports Report for a few more minutes, Ashley, who was at CCNY, and she's doing a phenomenal job now at Dominican University with the women's basketball team as the women's basketball team here gears up for some huge matchups coming up here this weekend, Friday and Saturday, back at home against Benedictine, and a number of conference games coming up. And we're looking forward to spotlighting the girls here. And they have a huge NACC season coming up here. It's a shortened season, but it means a lot more than it normally would. And I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, as we're here on Sportanarium, the #1 global radio station, for a few more minutes with Coach Hugh, who's doing a phenomenal job once again at Dominican University. And a huge shout out to everybody at the program, and especially Coach Rivas for all the great things that they are doing here. And I was also curious here, before we get your closing thoughts, and also a couple of other things to spotlight here on the girls basketball team, the games coming up here, is I was curious also on, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Do you see yourself as a head coach somewhere? Do you see yourself still here at Dominican? I mean, 5 years sounds like a long time from now, but it's really not. So I was kind of curious also from your vantage point, where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
I definitely do see myself maybe trying to shoot for a head coaching gig. And Coach Williams has been supporting me all throughout. Even Coach Rivas, he talks to me about it all the time. We talk about our aspirations, and he wants that success for me as well. So in a couple of years, I'm hopefully looking to get a head coaching job.
We know that you are going to be a head coach somewhere, and some program is going to be very lucky to have you because of all your experience on and off the court and all the great intangibles that you bring here. And then going back to the Dominican University program and the girls basketball team, as you're getting ready to play some big games coming up here. And what are the goals then for the season? I know we've talked a lot about the team and talked about the opening game here that passed this past week, and also a few of the players that we highlighted. But what do you think the goals are here? I mean, normally you'd say, again, in the 22, 28 game season, the goals are finish 500, win a tournament game or two, go deep into the season. But again, the season's a third of what it normally normally would be. So I'm curious from your vantage point and even for the team's standpoint, what are the goals upcoming here?
Well, I think the goal is always to win a championship, whether it's a 25 game season or it's a 9 game season. We come here looking to win a championship. Though personnel may be different from last year to this year, we're willing to make all those adjustments that we will need to make to win a championship. Besides that, give the girls a great experience at Dominican, graduate our seniors, have them be successful off the court as well. I think at the end of the day, it's always just bigger than basketball.
Absolutely. And in these times, everything is bigger than basketball. But the fact that you girls are out in the court is a tremendous accomplishment. It's a tremendous milestone that everybody at the entire program should be proud of and should be congratulated on. This is a big deal because back home here, the CUNYAC hasn't played, the Skyline hasn't played. We've done some work with the Pace Setters, and Pace was getting ready to play. They didn't play. So a lot of schools have not gotten that opportunity, but you girls have gotten that opportunity. So a huge congratulations to everybody at the program here, and especially also you, Coach K, Coach Moore, Coach Rivas, everybody who made this possible. And before we get your closing thoughts, I was also curious on this, Coach, and wanted to get your thoughts on it in terms of the season, because this program has had a lot of success over the past several years. This is a program that's used to winning. Do you think the expectations also might be high because of the success that this program has had over the years, even though it's a changeover in players and it's a shortened season and everything's heightened because of the pandemic and you can't look at it like you normally would, but because this program has had as much success as it's had over the past several years, are expectations heightened here because of that?
I would definitely say so. And both of us being young coaches, we definitely feel like we have eyes on us to, on the pressure to have this team be as successful as it was in the previous years. And again, this is why we hold our girls to such high expectations, because we believe that we have the ability to do this. Say this at practice. Every time we meet a goal, we're going to raise the ceiling. We're just going to continue to get better every single day, whether it's 1%, 2%, or whatever it is. Every day has to be a steady increase to get to where we're at, and where we want to be.
Absolutely. And a rising tide lifts all boats. And we definitely know that the Dominican University Stars women's basketball team and Coach Ashley Yu are going to be that rising tide that lifts us. And to have the kind of season that we're used to having here at Dominican in the NACC, you better watch out, because the Stars are going to be in action. Stephanie Huggins and the rest of the team are going to bring a storm that is going to brew to everybody here at the NACC. And that's why we are honored to have on Coach Ashley Yu to talk about her journey, and also most importantly the program here at Dominican University and the women's basketball program as they're back in action here on Friday night and Saturday night against Benedictine and several other huge NACC conference games coming up. And the tournament will also start on March 2nd, so we're not too far away from the tournament play, and conference play is in the thick of things. So it's a tremendous honor to have on Coach Yu to talk about all those great things. And for you, Coach, I want to give you the floor. I want to give any closing thoughts. I also want you to plug where our listeners can get in touch with you and keep up to date with all the great things that you're doing on and off the court. I also want you to plug any information that we can get involved and watch all the great games here for our Dominican University Stars basketball program and the men's and women's team. Also want to give a shout out to the men's team and any social media related, most importantly though, to the women's team, whether that's a Twitter, Instagram, also any social media that you have, and anything you want to say to our worldwide audience listening here on Sportanarium. I want to give you the floor, and I can't thank you enough, Coach. So plug our listeners and get in touch with you, plug anything else related to the Dominican University women's basketball team, and the floor is yours.
Well, I just want to thank you so much, Thomas, for really having me on here. It's my pleasure, and it's a real honor to even have a platform like this and be able to speak on a platform like this. So again, huge honor. Thank you so much for having me on here. We stream our games live for the entire conference, whether we're home or away, but you can get access on dustars.com. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter. I believe it's DU_stars. You guys can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter. So it's Coach_Ash U. So it's Coach_ASHYU.
Absolutely. And everybody needs to go out and follow Coach Yu and all the great things that she's doing and the rest of the program at Dominican University. It is definitely a program that we are all going to be proud of, and it's a team that we are all going to be proud of here. So extremely excited about the future of the program, and we're extremely excited to see the Dominican Stars and the rest of the athletic program. And you can also follow them, as Coach Yu pointed out, on Instagram and Twitter at DU_stars. Stars. That's at DU_stars. And also follow Coach U on Twitter at Coach_SU. And also, most importantly, follow the Williams Advancement Agency on Instagram at Williams Advancement Agency. And also go to www.williamsadvancementagency.com for more information on all the great things that Coach Williams is doing. For you, my friend, I cannot thank you enough. I'm looking forward to having you back on. Good luck out there on the court. Congratulations. And we're looking forward to speaking with you soon.
Thank you so much again for having me on here. Thank you again. Good luck with everything. I'm a big fan of your work.
Check's in the mail for that, Coach. Check is definitely in the mail. I definitely appreciate that. And I appreciate, most importantly, all of your support and friendship. And anything we can do to ever help you and promote the program, promote yourself, we'll do that here gladly. And we are here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show with one of our #1 coaches. And that is Ashley Yu, who's the coordinator of intramurals, camps, and club sports at Dominican University, the women's basketball team, where she's also an assistant coach, as I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice. And stay tuned for more hard-hitting analysis here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show, with another fellow basketball player, that is the brute force, Brad Weiss, the legendary SJC Golden Eagles men's basketball player, and now a star with the LI Brew Crew. And we are here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show on Sportanarium, the #1 global radio station, as we're here at www.sportanarium.com. And stay tuned for the brute force, Brad Weiss, to talk all the latest happenings in the world of sports. As we're here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show here on Sportanarium, with our #1 analyst around for all the latest happenings in the world of sports. And he's one of the greatest players in SJC Long Island Golden Eagles men's basketball history, for that 2018-19 season where he put it all together, where he was 3rd in the Skyline Conference in block shots, 13th in rebounds. And in school history, he's near the top of the list all time in block shots and 25th in rebounds. And he's now an integral reason as to why our LI Brew Crew won the 2020 ABA St. Louis Cardinals Division Championship. And without further ado, here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show, the brute force, Brad Weiss. My friend, how are you?
I'm doing well, Tom. How are you?
Always good when I get a chance to talk with you, my friend. And where does the time go? I feel like it was yesterday. We were literally talking about all the latest happenings in the world of sports, and yet here we are again talking about a lot once again going on. And if you like hard-hitting analysis, you are in the right place here on the Sports Report on Sportanarium. And the brute force, getting right down to the nitty-gritty here. The big game is finally a few days away here. And it's a matchup that we talked about for a little bit on last week's show. But for our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium, Chiefs and Bucks, wanted to get your thoughts first on a couple of keys for the Chiefs and then a couple of keys for the Bucks in order for them to win the Super Bowl. So the brute force, let's go first with the defending champions, who are technically the road team when it comes to the Kansas City Chiefs, and a few keys for you in order for the Chiefs to come out on top here and repeat as Super Bowl champions.
Yeah, Tom. So as you mentioned, they are the road team in this matchup. Even though they have the better record and were a #1 seed, they are the road team because the Super Bowl is taking place in Tampa Bay, Florida, where their opponents have a home field advantage this year. For the first time in NFL history, that a team gets a home Super Bowl game in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But with the Kansas City Chiefs here, it's going to be another Super Bowl appearance after they were in the Super Bowl last year and got the win. And Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback for the Chiefs, was the MVP of that game. Now, in order for the Kansas City Chiefs to win, he's going to have to be MVP again, most likely. But it won't start just with him, of course. It's going to take the offensive line to protect Patrick Mahomes. And there's a key injury, Tom. Left tackle Eric Fisher was injured with an Achilles injury in the AFC title game. So we're going to see who replaces him to protect Patrick Mahomes and that gunslinger of an arm he has to get it to his key targets, of course, Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, amongst others. So it's going to be protecting Mahomes, of course, keeping the ball in front of them on defense. Don't let Tom Brady throw it over to his big targets. Keep the ball in front of them, make short passes, and obviously limit the Tampa Bay Buccaneers running game. Those three things, as well as the great coaching of Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator, are going to be key to the Kansas City Chiefs winning the Super Bowl for the second straight season.
The brute force, I think if Tyreek Hill has more than 150 yards, Chiefs win. And I think what it also comes down to here is if Mahomes is able to get out of the pocket and he's able to scramble in his usual ways, watch out, Tampa Bay, because you have not faced a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes. And Travis Kelce is another big weapon. He's got a lot of weapons, so we'll certainly see if he's impacted by some of those injuries here. And then the brute force going over to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And certainly the first home team, I think, with an asterisk here when it comes to the Super Bowl. And obviously 3 road playoff games they win, a battle-tested team to say the least. It's a Bucs team that is definitely proven to defy the odds. And then from your vantage point here, talk about some of the keys you think the Bucs need in order for them to win the Super Bowl for the second time in team history and for the first time since 2002.
Yeah, Tom. So with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it all starts with the quarterback Tom Brady, the 6-time Super Bowl champion with the New England Patriots, and a guy who has all the experience in the playoffs and has gone through a lot, but has not won a Super Bowl with another team besides the New England Patriots and another coach besides Bill Belichick. So this is going to be very interesting. But he is here once again in the Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as he led them, like you said, to 3 road victories in the playoffs against some very good teams, Tom. And now he's in the Super Bowl with this team with a great defense and a very solid offense as well. But I'm going to be looking on the defense, of course, by former Jets head coach Todd Bowles, the defensive coordinator. And it's going to be very important for this team defensively to slow down the Kansas City Chiefs, starting with creating turnovers. They have to get Mahomes to get a couple turnovers. I'll be talking shortly about players that are going to be key to getting those turnovers. They're going to have to limit turnovers offensively. They did have a couple last week. We saw them. So they're going to have to limit the turnovers there. And then obviously, like I said, with Mahomes, same thing with Tom Brady. You got to protect him. Tom Brady is a guy who does not really run. He's not fleet of foot, Tom Brice. But he could sure get some great passes off and make some great plays in the playoffs after the team again and again if you protect them. So the offensive line is going to be key for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Defense is going to have to create some turnovers, I think, Tom, to win the Super Bowl.
The brute force, Tom Brady's 43 years old. I don't think he's moving too well out of the pocket. I mean, put that into perspective. He's 43 years old and is playing in the Super Bowl. I mean, most 43-year-olds at this point in their lives are pretty much slowing down and had their better days behind them, and yet Tom Brady is still here. So I don't think Tom Brady is going to be running or as mobile as Patrick Mahomes will be. But I could not agree with you more on the Tampa Bay defense. That is going to be the interesting X factor here, because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and their defense has played very well, no question, against the likes of Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers, but they have not faced someone in the postseason like a Patrick Mahomes. So to me, this is going to be a big test for the defense. But you mentioned a couple of different things that I wanted to go back in, and I think that the way to kind of highlight and segue into that is what we talked about on last week's show for the NBA was the brute enforcement list. So when it comes down to the big game here for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportanarium, the brute force, who's the brute enforcement list when it comes down to the Chiefs and Bucks?
Yeah, Tom. So this week's brute enforcement list, of course, the segment that has been put out and inspired by First Take, one of my favorite shows, and Alec Willis's as well as Steven's A-list, have the brute enforcement list. And this week, we're going to keep an eye on the guys who are going to make the big difference in the Super Bowl, the guys who maybe are not the big names like Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes, but guys that we need to keep an eye on this Super Bowl. I'm going to start on the Kansas City side of things. As I mentioned earlier, left tackle Eric Fisher, a very important player to the Kansas City offensive line, is out with an Achilles injury. So we're going to be looking at either backup tackle Martinez Rankin or a guard in Stefan Wisniewski. These two guys are backups who are going to be filling in for him and are going to need to do a very good job on an offensive line protecting Mahomes and helping the run game, which, by the way, we also have running back Le'Veon Bell questionable with an injury. So those two guys are going to be crucial to protecting Patrick Mahomes and doing a good job in the running game. Also, in the back end of the Kansas City defense, Tom, there's an injured questionable player with a foot injury, and that is Rashad Fenton. We talk about some of the big targets on the Bucs side: Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, possibly Antonio Brown, who's currently questionable. Even Tyler Johnson and Scotty Miller are good wide receivers for the Buccaneers. Guys like Rashad Fenton, who's a cornerback, is going to have to do a very solid job, as well as Rashad Breeland and Ward, of stopping and slowing down this very dynamic wide receiving core on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then going to the Tampa Bay side, we got safeties Antoine Winfield Jr. and Jordan Whitehead, two safeties who one of them was injured last week and the other one got injured in the game against Green Bay. Two of their young safeties who, if they're not in this game, Tom, this could be a very rude awakening for their defense because with all those guys we mentioned earlier, Tyreek Hill, Kelsey, the elusiveness of Mahomes, if they don't have solid safety coverage in the back end, Tom, they are going to have a long Super Bowl that might get a little ugly if these guys are not ready to play by Sunday.
The brute force, after hearing all those keys for the Chiefs and the Bucks and the brute enforcement list, putting you on the spot, as we always do here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show here on Sportanarium. Chiefs, Bucks, who do you think comes out with the W?
Yeah, Tom. So I've gotten to think about this for a couple of days, even weeks now, and also talking to our great NFL analyst here on the show, Jake Guggenheimer. I kind of conferred with him, hey, who are you going with? And I'm not going to spoil it, fans on Sportanarium, our great listeners, but I'm going to go with the Kansas City Chiefs. And the reason is because of Patrick Mahomes. He's going to have a big game. I know Tom Brady, 6-time Super Bowl champion. Every time I pick against him, Tom, he finds a way to prove me wrong. But I don't think he's going to do it this time. Mahomes and his weapons, I think the Kansas City defense, which is right now at the moment more healthy than the Tampa Bay defense, even though I still think the Tampa Bay defense is the better defense. But my concern here with those safeties that are questionable and a couple other players who are questionable on the defensive end of Tampa Bay concerns me. I think they'll do a solid job against Tom Brady. And I think Patrick Mahomes, he's going to go off, Tom. My fantasy quarterback who led me to a championship will lead Kansas City to another championship and be the MVP of the Super Bowl for the second straight year.
I'll tell you one thing, the brute force, if the Chiefs win, they'll become only the 9th team in NFL history to have repeated as Super Bowl champions. On the flip side of it, if Tom Brady wins the Super Bowl, the brute force, do you know that Tom Brady will have won more Super Bowls than any NFL franchise? No other NFL franchise will have won more Super Bowls or as many Super Bowls if Tom Brady wins. So if Tom Brady wins a Super Bowl, ladies and gentlemen, once again, he will have won more Super Bowls than any other NFL franchise. So there is a lot riding on this game. There's a lot to talk about on next week's show with it. And Mahomes and Brady, it's definitely one for the ages. It's the rematch, and these two guys have quarterbacked against each other now a couple of different times. So we'll certainly see what happens, and we'll talk about it with you next week. And we'll also talk with Googs also on tomorrow's show and get his thoughts on who he likes in the big game and a couple other keys when it comes to this year's Super Bowl taking place in Tampa. And the brute force, I think it's the only place that's actually normal in the United States right now. Florida just seems like everywhere. WrestleMania's in Florida, AEW's in Florida, the Super Bowl's in Florida. There's fans in Florida for the NBA, the NHL. So I think at this point, while the rest of us are suffering for the coronavirus, in Florida just seems like that they just went on with their lives. So obviously we're happy that the Super Bowl is taking place, and we'll talk about it with you on next week's show. But speaking of the NFL, the brute force, I know there was a big trade that actually took place after we went off the air last week, and wanted to get your thoughts on the Lions and Rams exchanging quarterbacks. And it's Matthew Stafford for Jared Goff, and also a few draft picks thrown in, but wanted to get your thoughts on the Matthew Stafford trade to the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, Tom. So first, before we even talk about the trade, we just mentioned our NFL analyst, Jay Guggenheimer, is my teammate on the LI Brew Crew. Well, another teammate of mine on the LI Brew Crew, John Fitzgerald, is a big Detroit Lions fan. And boy, is he considering what's going on here in Detroit, which has been a mess for a long time. But this is certainly a questionable situation here. And they made a big trade, moving their longtime quarterback, Matthew Stafford, to the Los Angeles Rams for young quarterback Jared Goff, 2 first-round picks in 2022 and 2023, and a 3rd-round pick in 2021. Now, of course, the Lions now have a new GM in Brad Holmes and new coach Dan Campbell. They decided to move on from Stafford and start fresh. And Jared Goff, whether he's the starter or not, Tom, because that'll be a big debate to see what happens with the Detroit Lions in this year's draft, as they have one of the top picks in the draft, to see if they go with a quarterback. But Jared Goff here is not a cheap quarterback. He recently signed a 4-year, $130 million contract with the Rams before last season. And with the Lions, he will have 2 of those paid years on their contract and their payroll. So we'll see what happens. On the other side, with Matthew Stafford, it definitely makes the Los Angeles Rams a better team. Stafford is a better quarterback, more experienced, and someone that deserves a team that has a chance to win. And unfortunately for John Fitzgerald and his Lions, they have not shown us a lot of winning and Stafford will be owed $34 million over the next 2 years by the Rams. So an interesting trade here. We'll see who benefits. I think the Rams are going to benefit big time, and we'll see if John Fitzgerald's Detroit Lions go anywhere towards winning in the foreseeable future, Tom.
The brute force, put it into perspective. The Detroit Lions, since the NFL and AFL merged in 1970, have won one postseason game. That postseason game was in 1991, the brute force. I mean, put that into perspective. The Detroit Lions have never been to a Super Bowl. They've only won one division title, and they won one playoff game in 1991. That's how poor this franchise has been since the NFL and the AFL merged. And they had a guy named Barry Sanders through most of my childhood. He ran for 2,000 yards. And Matthew Stafford was a very good quarterback for the Detroit Lions. The Lions had some good teams on the offensive end of the ball. So if you look at it, this is a move, I think, win now for the Rams. I think for the Lions, you're retooling. But the brute force, I got to wonder for John Fitzgerald, when are the Lions ever going to get it together? And for fans like John Fitzgerald, who have seen almost next to nothing in terms of success for the Detroit Lions, I mean, I get it that they've been in the same division as the Packers and the Vikings, and even the Bears have been good at times. But if you look at the last 25 to 30 years, I mean, the Packers and Vikings have been into the postseason more than half or 2/3 of that time. And I get it, but the Lions got to get it together one of these days. They just, for whatever reason, have not been able to. So I think we'll watch this very closely here, and we'll talk about, I'm sure, all the latest happenings in the world of the NFL, including our New York Jets. And the brute force, there was a lot of news in Major League Baseball once again. And first, I want to go over the news, since we haven't got to cover it yet, between the Colorado Rockies and the St. Louis Cardinals. And that superstar third baseman, Nolan Arenado, is now a St. Louis Cardinal. And he was traded from the Rockies, and wanted to get your thoughts on the trade and recap it for our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium.
Yeah, so first of all, let's just go quickly back to the trade we just talked about. I actually like the trade for both sides. In this situation in the MLB, Tom, the Colorado Rockies and the St. Louis Cardinals trade was straight garbage, in my opinion. And the reason why I say it is because all-star third baseman Nolan Arenado was traded for the Colorado Rockies, and Colorado Rockies also sent about $51 million as well because of the compensation of Arenado's contract to the Colorado Rockies. Are getting a left-handed pitcher, Austin Gomber, an infielder, Mateo Gil, another infielder, another pitcher, and another pitcher, Jake Summers. This is a trade here, Tom, with prospects, no picks, and really no benefit, in my opinion, for the Colorado Rockies. There's not somebody here that I believe is worthwhile for a guy like Nolan Arenado, who is arguably one of the top players in the entire MLB. So for the St. Louis Cardinals, Tom, this is an amazing trade. I know that they're going to take on a lot of money. They're losing some prospects here that maybe will be successful, but none of them are going to be as good as Nolan Arenado. This guy is a stud. He's a guy who fields well, hits well, is a great teammate. I mean, what else does he do? He's a tremendous player that is going to make the St. Louis Cardinals most likely the favorite in the NL Central. I will not go as far to say that they will get to the World Series possibly yet. They still have a lot of other teams in the NL to deal with, but this makes them a lot better. And for the Colorado Rockies, Tom, I just shake my head and really wonder why they made this trade. And really, I think they could have gotten a lot better for a guy like Nolan Arenado.
Oh, 100% the brute force. To me, I don't even know what you got back and how you could justify that to the fan base in Colorado. I mean, here's a team a few years ago that gets into the postseason a couple of times in a row and has some success, and he's a big part of that, and he's the guy that you build upon. He's a homegrown player. You re-signed him to a big money deal, and then you turn around and trade him. I mean, listen, 2017, 2018, this was a team that was in the postseason. You had back-to-back trips to the postseason. You finally got it right. You finally had some success, and then you move them. I mean, to me, I just don't get this one. But the brute force, for me, the Cardinals, and I'm thinking about Goldschmidt and Arenado in that infield. I mean, that lineup is going to be scary. And it's a National League Central that all of a sudden has scaled down dramatically. You look at the Reds. The Reds have made some moves in the offseason. You kind of scratch your head where guys left them. Obviously, Trevor Bauer being a big part of that when we know he's not coming back. You look at the Cubs. The Cubs have definitely stood down and pared back a little bit. Hugh Darvish is an example of that. The Brewers are kind of somewhere in the middle. The Pirates are retooling. So to me, the brute force, the Cardinals should be winning the NL Central for at least the next 3 or 4 years.
I believe so too. And let's not forget about their good pitching staff they have there. with a couple of very good young arms. So I like the St. Louis Cardinals as the favorite for years to come. And a guy like Nolan Arenado puts you from, okay, maybe we're on the same level as these teams, and puts you above and saying that you're the favorite now. So I personally think that's correct. Interesting story though, Tom. A big part of the St. Louis Cardinals lineup, second baseman Colton Wong, actually just signed a 2-year, $18 million contract with the Milwaukee Brewers, which are probably the second favorite because they have guys like Christian Yelich, couple nice bullpen pieces. They're probably the next team in line behind the Cardinals, and they just added a nice second baseman who had a 261 career average with the St. Louis Cardinals. So interesting story there. I still believe the Cardinals, like you said, are the favorite. I see the Milwaukee Brewers in the conversation, but with Nolan Arenado, that's something that's definitely going to lift you up to being the favorite in your division.
No question about it that the St. Louis Cardinals should definitely be lifted up in terms of being the favorites in the National League Central. And I've always said to Brute Force that the St. Louis Cardinals are the New York Yankees of the National League. And that's why we're honored to have here on the Sports Report, the number one global sports show, our number one analyst around. And that's the Brute Force, Brad Weiss, as I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice. And for more information here on the Sports Report, you can go to sportsreportx.com and listen to all of our archives with myself and the Brute Force. You can go to soundcloud.com/the Sports Report 2019. You can check us out now on YouTube at the Sports Report, the number one global sports show. And as always, a huge shout out to the entire team here at Sportanarium. That includes Lakey, Arb, Danny, Dale, Sean, Steve, Susie, Shasha, everybody at Sportanarium that has made us the number one global sports show. And for more information on Sportanarium, you can go to sportanarium.com, or you can catch the Sports Report Fridays, 5 to 7 Eastern Time, 10 to 12 UK time. Saturdays, 5 to 7, 10 to 12 UK time. And the news report comes back 5 to 7 Eastern Time, 10 to 12 UK time. And you can also follow Sportanarium on Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube at Sportanarium, where you can now catch the Sports Report on his last Friday's show with Carly Skelly, the Thumper. Carly Skelly is now on the Sportanarium YouTube page, and you can check that show. And the Brute Force is also on there as well. So everybody needs to go to the Sportanarium's YouTube page, subscribe, and listen to the Sports Report, and you'll see Fridays and Saturday shows on there going forward. And you can also like Sportanarium on Facebook at Sportanarium Media. I also want to give a huge shout out to RP Davies for kicking off the show this week. And you also heard from Ashley Yu just before you, the Brute Force. And Ashley Yu, you might have seen on the court because she was an assistant coach over at CCNY for the women's basketball team. So I know that you definitely saw Ashley on the sidelines when you guys were getting ready at some point on the court during your career at SJC Long Island. So a huge shout out to Ashley, and cannot thank her enough. She's doing a great job over at Dominican University as an assistant coach for the women's basketball team. And they're actually getting ready to play as we speak. So they're one of the few colleges at our level, the Brute Force, that has gotten to play. So I want to definitely acknowledge Ashley and Coach Rivas, and also a huge shout out as always to Michael Williams of the Williams Advancement Agency. Cannot thank enough Coach Williams for all of his support and friendship of the show. And we are here on the Sports Report, the number one global sports show, talking with the Brute Force, Brad Weiss, one of the legendary players of our LI Brew Crew. Follow on Instagram at LI Brew Crew. So be sure to follow the LI Brew Crew on Instagram at LI Brew Crew. And always a huge shout out to Jake Guggenheimer and Jake and Kyle Super, who came on the show, Fitzpatrick, Brendan Fitzpatrick, and everybody else who's supported us and has come on the show. And the Brute Force, going over to the NBA real quick. And the Nets seem like they've righted the ship here once again.
Yeah, Tom. So it's definitely an interesting ride. They've definitely gotten some consistency here, as we have spoken for the last week since we spoke the last time. They were 11-8. They've improved their record to 14-9, winning 3 of their last 4 games since we last spoke. The games that they won, of course, were against the Atlanta Hawks in overtime, 132-128. They beat the Thunder by a big-time score of 147-125. But, Tom, did they lose one of the worst games in NBA history that I've ever seen? Did they blow a lead to the Washington Wizards, where they were winning by a score of 146-141 with 12 seconds left, and gave up the lead in nearly 8 seconds? They were losing, and it was unbelievable to see, and the Nets blew that game. They had a chance to win it at the end, and TLC misses a layup with a second point blank, wide open, and the Nets lose. So that was one of the worst losses I've seen. So one of the worst teams in the NBA, Tom, the Washington Wizards, who were 3-12, and they're now 4-12. In their 4 wins, they've beaten the Nets twice. So that's very interesting right there. But the Nets did come back and beat the LA Clippers, and a very good team, 124-120. And the Big Three came back and definitely executed down the stretch in this game. So the Nets, like I said, now are 14-9. They have a little bit of a tough schedule here. They'll be playing the Toronto, a.k.a. Tampa Bay Raptors, tonight for our Sportanarium listeners on ESPN at 7 o'clock p.m. So for our Sportanarium listeners, they're playing tonight against the Toronto Tampa Bay Raptors, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And then they'll be playing a back-to-back in Philadelphia against the best team in the East. They'll also play Detroit next week, as well as the Indiana Pacers. So overall, yes, they're riding the ship. They're looking better. They're getting higher in the rankings here, Tom. And the Big Three is starting to play together and get their continuity together.
I think the brute force, the more that Durant, Irving, and Harden play together, I think they're going to be even more scary to face off. And that Wizards game was definitely one for the ages. I mean, the only other game I could think of was the Reggie Miller game against the Knicks in '95. I still remember where I was as a kid when that game took place. That was the only other game that came to mind. And I agree with you. That Wizards team is as bad a ball club as you're going to see in the Eastern Conference. And the Eastern Conference is not a great conference to begin with. So the Nets losing that game was definitely a tough one. But again, as I've always said to brute force, it's not about the Nets winning 55 games in the regular season or 52 games or 50 games, whatever it is. It's championship or bust. So to me, the Nets regular season, throw it all out the window. And your New York Knicks, the brute force, seem like they've hit a little bit of a bump in the road here.
Yeah, so the New York Knicks, I've said it all along, Tom, are very inconsistent. Obviously, we've seen some great play, and I'm going to talk about one player that has been absolutely tremendous and another player who's made some great strides here. But the team as a whole, Tom, have won some good games and then followed it up with multiple losses. And in this case, it happened again over the past week. They beat the Cavaliers at Madison Square Garden last Friday by a score of 102-81. Emmanuel Quickley, the rookie, Tom, the point guard, had 25 points off the bench to lead the team. RJ Barrett has made some great strides, 24 points, Randall at 16, and they finally stopped Andre Drummond in that game, so they did a nice job. The next game, they played the LA Clippers, and they lost to a good team, 129-115. Quickly, once again, 25 points off the bench, and we're saying to ourselves, why isn't this guy starting? I mean, the point guard, Elfrid Payton, is not exactly one that's blowing your mind, but Emmanuel Quickley out of Kentucky, the point guard, has been tremendous. He's extremely athletic. He's very quick, as his last name says, Quickley, and he's a great shooter. So a guy who needs to be in that starting lineup, in my opinion, soon. And even Paul George and Coach Tyronn Lue and the Clippers recognized his great play. So a guy that we've been waiting for, New York Knicks fans, a young, elite point guard. So thank you, and we'll continue to see how he does going forward. And then they lost the game to the Chicago Bulls, and this is where we talk about the inconsistency. A Bulls team that has a similar record to them. They lost 110-102. The Knicks are now 9-13, and they shot 20% from three in this game. So the consistency in shooting, the defense has been one of the most consistent parts of the team, but you don't know, besides Quickley, Randall, and RJ Barrett, who's going to show up and who's going to play well on a given night. So in my opinion, Tom, the Knicks are over-exceeding expectations possibly, but the consistency is going to be the problem for this team going forward.
The brute force, I think for the Knicks, we now have seen an identity with this team, with Tom Thibodeau, is that defensively, they're a good team. They're right up there at the top of the league when it comes to points allowed, and they're in a lot of these games. So we see that there's an identity now with this team for the first time in a long time. But I think what it's going to come down to here with the Knicks, the brute force, is finding that second or third option. RJ Barrett is showing you that he can be the second option, but after that, you have to find that third option. Julius Randle is obviously, he's getting the opportunities, and he's averaging 22 and 11, give or take. So you've established that he's the guy. But after that, the Knicks have trouble finding other options to score and ease the load off RJ Barrett and Julius Randle. So I think that for the Knicks going forward, the brute force, just as it's for the Nets, championship or bust, and and it doesn't really matter what they do in the regular season. What only matters is the big three continue to play with each other and get that familiarity. With the Knicks, it's about finding another option. It's about who can become the guy after Julius Randle and RJ Barrett, and if he gets more time in the starting rotation. So those are the things to me that I look forward to when it comes to the Knicks and the Nets. And the Brute Force, anything else that you're looking for or anything else on the Brute enforcement list we should keep an eye on?
Yeah, so let's just start with the Knicks' upcoming schedule. Very important, Tom. And the key here is that they're going to be playing a home-and-home series with the Miami Heat at Madison Square Garden on Sunday, and on Tuesday in sunny Miami, Florida, they'll be playing the Miami Heat again. A team that's struggling, Tom, but the Knicks really want to get themselves to where they want to be. They're going to have to go and play a struggling Miami Heat team that finally has their team together, and they're definitely going to have to show that they can beat teams like Miami, who was in the NBA Finals last year. And for somebody like Julius Randle, who is aspiring to be an all-star this year, Tom, the NBA and the NBA PA are progressing toward an agreement for a single-night all-star game and skills competition on March 7th in Atlanta, Georgia at the State Farm Arena. Of course, the scheduled time was between March 5th and March 10th was the week off, but the All-Star game, which was supposed to be in Indiana, was canceled due to COVID. But the NBA has decided to relocate it to possibly in Atlanta. Nothing is confirmed yet, but according to sources, this is getting a little bit more sturdy here. We're going to see what happens, and the reason why it was going to be in Atlanta is because the game is going to be broadcasted by Turner Sports, which is TNT, which is located in Atlanta, so that the staff and the people who work the games will not have to move out of their state, which they are based in. So we'll see if this all comes together, and we'll see also whether Irving, Durant, Harden, and like I mentioned, Julius Randle become all-stars, and we'll see in the upcoming Knicks schedule whether Randle continue to play well and continue to prove he's an all-star. And speaking of all-stars already, Tom, the players of the month for the NBA, the Eastern Conference, Joel Embiid, playing like an NBA MVP candidate, had 28.3 points and 11 rebounds a game in the 16 games, and the 76ers are 14-2. So he was the Eastern Conference Player of the Month, and the Western Conference Player of the Month was Nikola Jokic, an MVP candidate as well. 26 points, 11 rebounds, and 8 assists a game in 20 games. Unbelievable stuff. Great two players there. And then the last thing I want to mention here is the rookies of the month. In the Eastern Conference, it's LaMelo Ball. LaMelo Ball, the Hornets, was the number 3 pick, averaging 12 points a game, 6 assists, 6 rebounds, and a steal a game for the Hornets in his first 21 games. He has a triple-double, 2 double-doubles, and he started for the first time this past game against the Miami Heat. And then the Western Conference, the rookie of the month was Tyrese Halliburton. And if you guys remember, I was on the record saying that Tyrese Halliburton was the player that I thought the New York Knicks were going to draft with the 8th overall pick. But they decided to go otherwise. But Halliburton is a stud. A tall point guard averaging 10.7 points a game, 5 assists, 4 rebounds, and a steal a game. He's playing over 29 minutes a game, has been tremendous for the Sacramento Kings. So am I saying the New York Knicks got that pick wrong? I don't know yet. We'll see what happens. But with Obi Toppin, but Tyrese Halliburton is good, and these players are playing at elite levels, and we'll see, Tom, whether that continues. And also, let's hope we have an all-star game this year.
Let's certainly hope that we have an all-star game. Let's certainly hope that we have some normalcy. I think we will have an all-star game. I think we will get there. I think the league knows what it's doing. And I think having it in a location like Atlanta or Florida, where, again, everything seems to happen in Florida, I think that makes the most sense. But the Brute Force, before we get your closing thoughts here, we almost saved the worst for last. Usually it's the best for last, but in this case, it's the worst for last. And the Brute Force, I got to ask you then, how do you feel about Mickey Callaway these days?
I'm disgusted, Tom Brice. And this is just unbelievable stuff. I mean, we just came off a few weeks ago talking about GM Jared Porter, and they had just hired Porter to be the GM. He was a qualified candidate to become that, and then he got caught sending explicit photos of females and did ridiculous, disgusting behaviors and got fired the day after we talked about it. Now, former Mets manager, who was the manager between 2018 and 2019, Mickey Callaway, has just came, and multiple women have came out and accused of mistreatment and sending explicit photos of female reporters during his time as a coach with the Indians, the Mets, and currently the Angels. The Angels have suspended Callaway, but this is a foolish and disgusting act that these guys are putting on, and it's just so disgusting. I'm going to use that word again because I just can't believe that these guys who are privileged enough to have these jobs and be managers and be GMs, and they're doing this terrible behavior behind the scenes, and it's just terrible for guys. And unfortunately, it continues to somehow come with guys who have been a part of the New York Mets. So it's very bad. I am not happy about it, Tom, and I am happy that the women have came out, and I hope that the MLB investigates this very seriously, and Mickey Callaway definitely gets the discipline that he deserves in being caught and being told this is not acceptable behavior for any coach or GM.
Mickey Callaway, I had no love for as Mets manager, and I certainly have even less love for him now for what he's done off the field. And there's no question that there's no place for this, not just in sports, but anywhere. So hopefully, if this is all proven to be true, Mickey Callaway stays as far away from a Major League Baseball field in a dugout, very far away. I hope he stays as far away possible as it can be. And listen, he wasn't even a great manager to begin with. I didn't consider him to be a great coach. He was supposed to be the quote-unquote pitching guru, but at the end of the day, we didn't really get too much success with the bullpen, and that was due to Mickey's leadership. So listen, on and off the field, he clearly gets an F in my book, and I'm sure in your book as well. But for you, my friend, I want to give you the floor. I want to give you any closing thoughts. As always, plug where our listeners can get in touch with you, and obviously I cannot thank you enough for all that you do for us, as you're an integral reason as to why we're the #1 global sports show. And as always, a huge shout out to all the forces. May the force be with everybody, including the gentle force, the strong force, the super force, and the special force. So for you, my friend, you know the drill. Plug listeners get in touch with you, and I can't thank you enough, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom, for another great week of the Sports Report. As you mentioned, everybody make sure you follow us on social media. The Sports Report X on Facebook, at Thomas Brice 2017 on Twitter, at The Sports Report 2020 on Instagram, and our YouTube page now, The Sports Report, the #1 global sports show. Make sure you follow us and also check out our website, sportsreportx.com, where we'll have a blog up there soon on some of the stuff that we've been talking about on The Sports Report. As I always do, I want to thank the frontline workers, doctors, nurses, delivery people, all the people on the front lines doing great work. You are true heroes, and I want to give a big happy birthday to one of those heroes, my good friend Mike O'Brien's girlfriend, Lauren Sparrow, a person that's been in those hospitals, been through this COVID, and has done a great job being the true hero, saving lives every single day. So I want to thank Lauren and give her a big happy birthday. Speaking of happy birthdays, I also want to give some to some other great guys I know, including Plainview JFK and Baruch volleyball star Nick Godino, another Plainview JFK player, this time on the football side, and a good friend of mine, Yosef Afkinzada, another Plainview JFK basketball player who played after my time there, a good friend of mine and someone who supported me big time, and Brandon Becker, and then two of our top LI Brew Crew fans, of course, and great softball players in their own right for the LI Sky Bison, and that is Corey and Josh Wolin, the Wolin brothers. Happy birthday to everybody who I just mentioned. Hope you guys have a great day, and I hope you enjoy your birthday and continue to do great things on the softball field and with your lives, what you're doing now. I also want to thank the Sportanarium, as always, the great team, #1 global sports radio station around. Thank you to them, and thank you to our great team on the Sports Report, Rob Maraska and Ernest Dove on baseball, my good friend Jay Guggenheimer, who's been covering football for us, and now will be covering hockey for us with Tom, as they will go at it, Rangers and Islanders, and some fun stuff in the NHL, so I can't wait to hear that, as well as our new analyst here, former Major Leaguer Craig Holman. So I can't wait to hear everybody on Sportanarium, and follow them at Sportanarium on all social media platforms, and hear us Fridays, Saturdays, and Sunday from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Can't thank you enough, Tom, for another great week, and I cannot wait to do it yet again next week.
A rising tide lifts all boats, and the brute force Brad Weiss is definitely that rising tide that is going to lift us. And a huge happy birthday to all of those many great people you listed. And also want to thank our many, many first responders and frontline workers out there who have made a difference in our communities, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in Australia, whether it's here in New York, back at home on Long Island, in Staten Island, in parts of Brooklyn. They have definitely made a difference for all of us, and we wouldn't be where we are today. But we're talking about all these great things if it was not for our first responders and frontline workers. And for you, my friend, I cannot thank you enough for all that you do for us, and looking forward to speaking with you next week, recapping the Super Bowl and also talking about Daniel Murphy. We had so much hard-hitting analysis to go over with you that we're going to just resume this and talk about Daniel Murphy's retirement with you. We didn't get a chance to talk about that and cannot wait to do that with you again next week, along with the big games and some NBA talk and all the latest happenings in the world of sports, my friend. So can't thank you enough, and looking forward to speaking with you next week.
Thank you, Tom.
As we're here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show with the brute force, Brad Weiss, one of the greatest players in SJC Long Island Golden Eagles men's basketball history, and a key member of our LI Brew crew. As I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, and stay tuned for some brand new music from the legendary Joe Dell and Spectrum Green and Sleepy Hollow, as we are here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show on Sportanarium, the #1 global radio station. As I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, as we were just with the brute force Brad Weiss, and stay tuned for brand new Joe Dell music.